Chapter 1. Wishes. In the place where everything is covered in darkness, there is a small ball of light floating around there. I don't know for how long has it been since I am here. I do know that I was a high school student and all the things, mostly anime and manga, that I have witnessed. I remember all that very well. Just the last few minutes before coming to this dark place are all blur, thought the ball of light. A few more weeks or so later, the ball of light, or more accurately, the soul of the boy, was getting rather impatient or frustrated from all that waiting because he had started to get bored there. During all the time he had reviewed all the anime and manga he had ever watched or read through his memories, and now he had nothing left to do. Just a few minutes after he had started thinking what to do, something like a portal of light appeared in front of him. Out of the portal a humanoid figure wearing a black coat and pants came out of it, but his face just appeared as a blur to him. The humanoid figure first looked around and then looked towards the soul and said, "Sorry for the delay, I was rather busy in my work that I forgot about you," he said in a very casual tone. Hearing him, the soul of the man got irritated but controlled himself and asked, "Okay, first who are you and what place is this and what am I doing here?" Hearing his question, the humanoid figure looked towards him and said, "Who, rather a calm one, eh? For the answer to your questions, I am a high-level being who is supposed to manage the rebirth cycle of this dimension, and this place in your terms you can call it as void, and why you are here should now be obvious to you as you are dead." The soul took some time to digest the information, and then sighed and asked, "So what will happen to me now?" Hearing his response, the humanoid figure chuckled and said, "Not sad or confused after hearing about your death." The soul calmly said, "Well, what's done is done, it cannot be reversed, and it's not like that I had any family or friends who would miss me even if I die." Hearing him, the humanoid figure also sighed and said, "Normally a soul that dies had to be sent to either heaven or hell depending upon their actions, or being sent back to their world in a new body without their memories to start a new life." The soul was about to ask something, but the humanoid figure stopped him and said, "But since I was very late and made you wait in the void for so long, I can give you an opportunity to live a life in a world you like with some wishes, of course. So what do you say?" Hearing his offer, the soul became slightly excited and asked, "It can be any world, right? Even anime and manga world?" "Yes, it can be any world, but you cannot travel to another world, only one world, so choose carefully." The soul thought for a while, but suddenly he thought of something and asked, "How many wishes do I get?" The humanoid figure said, "You will get 5 wishes, out of which one will be about changing your appearance, and one would be any one person's powers with some optimization." The soul began thinking again, and after an hour or so said, "For the world I would like to go to the world of high school DXD. Okay, it's done. Now tell me about your wishes." "Okay, for the wishes I would like to have 1. Super growth. 2. Skill creation. 3. Immortality. 4. Powers of Seiki Kusuwa from the anime, The Disastrous Life of Seiki Kusu. 5. Appearance of Tatsuya Shiba from the anime, The Irregular at Magic High School." The humanoid figure thought for a while and said, "Okay, that's possible, but the immortality thing will be like you would be live like other supernatural beings. That means you could be killed, and in return you could make the lifespan of your trusted normal humans just like yourself by giving them your blood, but it would not work if either one of you does not acknowledge each other or rather trust each other, and no, your blood cannot be used to save life in dire situations or for treating injuries." The soul was silent for a while, digesting the information given to him, and then with a sigh he said, "Okay, and also can you make me an orphan, as I don't want my parents to get involved in the supernatural world, and make me of the same age of Issei Huidu." "Okay, all of the things are done, and as a bonus I would give you a house in Kuoh and money able to last for about 10 years or so. You will reincarnate as 4-year-old, and also don't tell anything about me or your past life to anyone, even those who you trust, and I have put a seal on your brain so that no one would be able to read your brain, and of course the people would not be able to notice the seal. Now bye. Bye, and thanks a lot for this chance." As soon as he said that, he was sucked into a portal, and the soul lost his consciousness. Chapter 2. Start. In a room, a small boy with black hair was lying down on the bed. The boy's appearance may be regarded as cute and lean. After a while, the boy opened his eyes and checked his surroundings. He suddenly got some information, or rather memories, in his head. He clutched his head and gritted his teeth from pain. After a while he got up, breathing heavily, and was sweating as well. He stood up from the bed and started walking towards the bathroom. While walking he said, "So my name is Tatsuya Shiba as well, and I live in Kuoh Town. My parents died 2 months ago during a car accident, and my relatives left me alone in this house as they did not want to take me in." When he reached the bathroom he firstly took a bath, and then checked his body. After changing his clothes, he went to the living room and started to think what he will do in future and made a training regime for himself. Suddenly he thought that he had no way of checking his physical condition and power, so he thought of using his magic creation to create an appraisal ability. Suddenly a jolt of current passed through his body. He thought in his mind and said, "Status," and suddenly a small holographic display came in front of him. Name: Tatsuya Shiba. Age: 4. Race: High Human. HP: 1000. Average Human Adult around 500. MP: 1000. Average Human Adult around 100. CP: 1000. Average Human Adult around 100. STR: 50. Average Human Adult around 20 to 25. AGI: 50. Average Human Adult around 15. END: 42. Average Human Adult around 30. INT: 50. Average Human Adult around 20 to 25. WIS: 28. Average Human Adult around 30 to 35. Luck: 100. Skills: Magic Creation. Super Growth. Appraisal. Powers of Seiki Kusuwa. Seeing his status, one thing was clear to him: the sad truth about his powers. He still have to study. While he was still depressed, he thought for a while, but didn't understood some of the things. Firstly, why was his race high human instead of just human, and what was CP in his status, but shrugged it off. He knew why his stats were that high. It was because of the continuous growth that psychic powers cause to the body. Sono, the only things left to do are to make skills to control and hide my powers along with other useful skills. Time skip. After hours of thinking, Tatsuya made some new magic and skills. 1. Deception to hide his energy signature. 2. Protection film to not use his petrification and psychometry by mistake. 3. Psychic control to control his psychic powers. 4. Elemental magic. 5. Space-time magic. 6. Close combat. 7. Creation magic. 8. Barrier magic. 9. Light magic. 10. Dark magic. 11. Healing magic. 12. Detection. 13. Photographic memory. He nodded and felt proudly at his work, and then went to the kitchen to prepare lunch for himself, and after eating he went to his room to rest for a while. When he reached his room, he found an envelope on his desk. He picked up the envelope and opened it and found a card and a letter. He opened the letter and it read, "Yo Tatsuya. Your friendly wish giver here. I hope you reach there without any problems. Anyway, here is the card. It contains around 15 million yen. I guess that should be enough for the time being. And also for practice combat, you can go in your astral form and fight many creatures there, and you might even find 1 or 2 surprises there. Anyway, that's all for now. Bye. P.S. Don't forget to keep my existence a secret." After reading the letter, Tatsuya used his space-time magic to create a dimension pocket and put both the letter and the card in it. After thinking for a while, Tatsuya decided to check the layout of the city before going to bed. He changed his clothes and also put some of his clothes in his storage and went out of the house. Time skip. After checking most of the streets near him and buying some groceries along with a phone, he returned back to his home and took out some of the groceries from it and put it all on the table before arranging it. After he was done arranging, he looked at the clock and thought that there was still some time left before dinner, so he started playing with his powers, and because of his super growth skill, his powers evolved extremely fast. While he was enjoying floating around the house, he heard his doorbell and got startled and fell down on his butt. He went towards the door without looking slightest bit startled, as his body was already very tough that the fall didn't cause him any pain, and he had already checked who was on the door through his detection and X-ray vision. When he opened the door, he found 3 people standing in front of him. 1 man in his late 20s, 1 woman around the same age as the man, and a small girl who was around his age. The significant thing was that Tatsuya knew who the girl was. The girl had light brown hair and had slightly violet eyes and looked like a tomboy. Tatsuya remembered seeing her in the anime. She was indeed Irina Shidou. Tatsuya looked at the man and asked, "How may I help you?" The man looked at Tatsuya and smiled and said, "Good evening. My name is Tuji Shidou, and me and my family shifted here this afternoon, so I thought of introducing ourselves to the neighbors." Seeing her father introducing himself, Irina also raised her hand and said, "Nice to meet you. My name is Irina Shidou." Tatsuya nodded and said, Nice to meet you as well. My name is Tatsuya Shiba. I hope we can get along. Tatsuya bowed a little while introducing himself. He looked towards the only person who didn't introduce herself. As if getting what he was asking, the lady bowed a little and said, Nice to meet you. My name is Shidou. I am Irina's mother. Tatsuya welcomed them inside his house and made them sit in the living room. He went to the kitchen and brought iced tea and some snacks for them. When he came back, Tuji looked towards him and asked, Tatsuya-kun, where are your parents? I want to meet them as well. Tatsuya placed the glasses and the snacks on the table and sat back on the sofa silently and looked towards him and said, They are no more. I live alone. Suddenly the environment in the room got heavy and Tuji felt guilty for asking him about his parents. Tuji looked at him and said, I am sorry. Tatsuya waved his hands saying that it's all right. Grace looked at him with pity and asked, What about your other relatives? Where are they? Tatsuya looked at her and said, There is some problems in the family, that's why I cannot live with them. Hearing him, she stopped asking questions. The atmosphere started to get more tensed, but it was broken by the sound of a growl from Irina's stomach. Everyone looked at her, who was clutching her stomach and was blushing because of embarrassment. Seeing her like that, everyone started chuckling. Tuji got up from his seat and asked, Why don't you have dinner with us? Tatsuya-kun, Grace's cooking is very delicious. Irina also overcame her embarrassment and said, Yeah, Mom's cooking is very good. You should join us. She grasped Tatsuya's hands and looked at her with an expression which said, You are joining no matter what. Seeing her expression, Tatsuya gave a defeated sigh and agreed with them. Seeing him like that, both Tuji and his wife smiled at their children and went to their home for dinner. Chapter 3. Puppy Eyes. Time skip. 1 month. After that day, the Shidou family often called Tatsuya for dinner and for outings. Even Tatsuya sometimes called the Shidus at his home for dinner, and they were surprised that a boy the same age as their daughter could take care of himself so well, as his house was well maintained and his cooking was delicious as well. To Tatsuya, it seemed that the Shidus had asked in the neighborhood about him, and they found out how his relatives refused to take him in after his parents' death. They were angry at his relatives and often tried to adopt him as well, but he kindly refused to them, saying that he was fine with living like this. Both Irina and Tatsuya had joined the same school, and Irina was the one to force him in joining the same school, as she did not want to be in a school full of strangers. Irina often played with him or went out with him for sightseeing the town, as he was her only friend, and she didn't had any problem with it, as she was never bored when he was around her. During this time, Tatsuya has also started training in his astral form, and he had only one thought about that type of training: it's damn easy. It turned out that Seiki's powers along with his magic and supergrowth were too much for fighting those monsters. Though sometimes some strong monsters might appear, they too get defeated easily, just they take slightly more time. And that slightly more time here means 5 to 10 seconds. Tatsuya has also created some more skills using his skill Create, and some weapons using creation magic as well. Skills. 1. Full counter, magical and physical. 2. Ain card sword style. 3. Tatsuya's guns blazing. 4. Might Guy's taijutsu. 5. Chakra manipulation. 6. Ki manipulation. 7. Super regeneration. 8. Super magic recovery. 9. Body strengthening. 10. Unlimited blades work, chant still required. 11. Negation magic. 12. Sunshine. 13. Parallel thinking. 14. Trace magic. 15. Limta. 16. Gravity manipulation. 17. Abnormal status resistance. Weapons. 1. Noble phantasms. 2. Sacred treasures. 3. Elucidator. 4. Dark repulsor. 5. Silver Taurus pistols. 6. Imperial arms. Most of Tatsuya's skill kept on evolving even if he performed it for a short while. Most of the skills from the anime he got was because all the anime and manga are stored in his brain, and he is able to remember them because of his photographic memory, and able to picture it clearly because of Seiki's skill photography, making him gaining skills because of the super growth. Because of all the skill and his supernatural growth rate, he is already at the level where he can defeat the ultimate class beings of this world. He had to put limiters on his body so that he accidentally does not kill anyone. Right now Tatsuya is meditating in his room as it was the only thing in which he doesn't get bored as its difficulty level never decreases, and he also feel calm and peaceful while he meditates. After he finished doing his meditation, he went out for his morning workout. Even though his strength always increases, he suppress it with putting limeters on his body, and then increasing the gravity on his body. He doesn't need to do it as his strength and other physical stats keeps on increasing, but it does not mean that it changes his body as well. He needs to work out to maintain his physique as he is a voracious eater and a foodie as well. He also likes to do it as it was something that he enjoyed doing in his past as well. After completing his workout, he went inside his house, took a bath, and prepared breakfast for himself. After eating and doing all the chores of the house with his skick powers, he thought that he should go and buy groceries. After changing his clothes and checking all the things in the house, he went out of the house. Just when he opened the door, he faced Irina, who when saw Tatsuya got excited and hugged him. Tatsuya, who was still shocked about this, unconsciously hugged her back. Seeing both of them like this, Grace chuckled, but Tsuji had a conflicted expression. He was happy about seeing his daughter like this but was getting frustrated of Tatsuya taking his daughter away. Tsuji fake coughed so as to get their attention. When Tatsuya heard Tsuji coughing, he got back to reality and immediately separated himself from her. Irina, who was still a child, does not understood anything. He looked at them and asked, "Why are you all here this early in the morning, and how did Irina woke up early today?" Hearing him, both the parents chuckled, but Irina pouted and looked away with a humph and puffed her cheeks. Tatsuya looked at her and poked her inflated cheeks, much to the others' amusement. Irina, who got irritated, looked at him with anger and said, "Moo, don't tease me this much." Tatsuya nodded and asked, "So why are you here this early?" Hearing his question, Irina beamed with joy and said, "Since today is weekend, the school will start from the next week. We are going to the amusement park and came here to invite you." Hearing them, Tatsuya, who was about to go and buy groceries, started thinking. Seeing that Tatsuya was not agreeing with her, Irina used her final attack. She looked at Tatsuya and puppy eyes and asked, "You will come with us, right?" Seeing her make puppy eyes, Tatsuya wanted to look away but was still able to feel them. He looked at his only saviors, her parents, who were chuckling on seeing him getting troubled by her. Tatsuya finally sighed in defeat and said, "Okay, I will come with you, but while returning please stop by somewhere as I need to buy some groceries." While Tatsuya was saying this, Irina had already started dragging him to their car. Chapter 4. School. After the trip to the amusement park, the very next day Tatsuya and Irina went to buy the supplies they would require for the school, and here too Irina tried to make Tatsuya buy stuff which looked similar to hers, but this time Tsuji took Tatsuya with him, leaving Irina with Grace, much to Irina's disappointment. Tsuji even apologized for Irina's behavior and clinginess, to which Tatsuya waved his hands to assure him that it was okay. After buying their supplies, they went home as they were supposed to start school from tomorrow, and though there was a slight change in the plans which Tatsuya didn't told Irina, as she would be shocked when she would hear about it, but it was only a small problem as her parents also knew about it. In the morning, Irina and Tatsuya happily went to school along with her family, though the three of them were thinking what probably would be the reaction that Irina would show when she would hear about it. When they reached the main school building, Irina took Tatsuya's hand and started to drag him while saying, "Let's go, Tatsuya." Tatsuya only sighed and pulled her slightly, making her stop. Irina had a confused look on her face as Tatsuya had never stopped her whenever she pulled him. Tatsuya had a helpless expression on his face. He looked towards Tsuji, who was looking away from them. Seeing this, Tatsuya had his veins popping out on his forehead, and then an idea popped in his head. He looked towards Irina and said, "Your dad wants to tell you something." Hearing him, all of them had different expressions. Tatsuya, who was smirking while looking at Tsuji, Grace was trying hard to hold her laughter. Irina was looking at Tsuji with a confused but cute expression on her face, and lastly Tsuji, whose lips were twitching and was inwardly cursing Tatsuya. Tatsuya brought Irina towards her father and freed his hand from hers and said, "Bye," while walking in another direction which was different from the one Irina was leading him to. Irina looked at Tatsuya and then looked at Tsuji, who was trying to look away from her. Irina, who was still staring at her father, asked, "What do you want to talk to me, and why is Tatsuya going in that direction?" Hearing her question, Tsuji frowned but still built his confidence and said, "You see, Irina, though both you and Tatsuya joined the same school, there were too many children in your building. That's why some of the students were shifted to the new building, and Tatsuya is one of those students." Irina first looked at the building in front of her, and then the building next to hers. Though both the buildings were nearby, it still caused quite a huge damage to Irina. Irina looked at Tuji for a while and then smiled and said, "Okay, bye." Seeing her reaction, both the parents were shocked and were looking at Irina weirdly. Irina started to move towards her school, but after taking a few steps she stopped. She turned and looked towards her parents with a smile on her face. She turned her body and started running toward Tatsuya's direction while shouting, "I am going with it." Tuji blinked for a while and then started running towards her daughter while shouting, "Wait!" Irina reached the gate of Tatsuya's school, but her father had already caught her. She grabbed the school gate while her father pulled her while saying, "Irina, let go, you will be late." To which Irina replied, "No, you let go, I am going with Tatsuya." Seeing both the father and daughter, all the nearby public was wondering what was happening there. While this was going on, both Grace and Tatsuya were pretending that they were not with them and hid within the crowd. Both of them looked at each other and nodded while shaking their hands. Tatsuya went to his class quietly without anyone noticing him, and Grace went back to the car silently. Seeing that no one was going to help her, Irina reluctantly let go, and Tuji quickly picked her up so that she could not try again and took her to her class. Chapter 5. Meeting the boys. After leaving behind the desperate father and daughter pair, Tatsuya went to his class and took the most famous, the protagonist's seat, as it was still empty. After taking his seat, he looked out of the window and saw Irina and Tuji still trying to win over each other. He was a little surprised when he saw Irina gave up rather easily. Soon after that, some more students started coming to the class. He looked at the seat beside him and saw a boy with blonde hair sitting there, and he looked like he was in the same situation as Tatsuya, that is, he too didn't know anybody here. Just as he was about to introduce himself to the boy, the teacher came to the class. The teacher looked around the class and nodded on seeing that everybody was present. She introduced herself to them and then asked the students to do the same. When his turn came, he stood up and said, "Tatsuya Shiba," and then sat down quietly. The teacher and the students gave him a second glance but left it at that. Tatsuya looked at the boy who was sitting beside him, stood up to introduce himself, but Tatsuya was very surprised to meet one of the characters of the show so soon. The boy who stood up looked at the teacher with an excited smile and said, "My name is Saji Genshiro, I hope that we all can be friends," and sat down. Tatsuya looked at him for a second, but then looked back at the teacher. After the introduction, classes went on like normal. Tatsuya, even though thought that it was easy for him, still looked at the teacher, and did not look out of the window or slept on the desk like any other protagonist. Now don't misunderstand, he was still not listening to the teacher, but was meditating with his eyes open. After the bell for the break rang, Tatsuya looked at the boy sitting beside him and moved his hand forward and said, "Nice to meet you, I am Tatsuya Shiba." Saji looked towards him and smiled before shaking his hand and said, "Nice to meet you as well, I am Saji Genshiro." They both talked for a while, and Tatsuya confirmed his suspicion that Saji too didn't know anybody here. They both went outside and had lunch together. There were also some boys who approached them, and they too became friends with both of them, though the other boys along with Saji were slightly annoyed as many girls came to Tatsuya to talk to him and ask him to play with them. Tatsuya could only smile helplessly. While all this was happening, Tatsuya didn't notice Irina, who was secretly looking at him with a hateful gaze. After the lunch break was over, all of them went back to the class, and again Tatsuya did the same thing. Though during the time they were asked to play dodgeball on the field, most of the boys thought of giving Tatsuya a lesson as he got very popular among the girls, even though it was his first day at the school. Tatsuya, who heard what they were thinking through his telepathy, decided to teach them to mess up with him. On the field, the only thing that the game could be called was total annihilation. Tatsuya dodged every ball aimed towards him while ruthlessly hitting them back, though he controlled his strength to not give them serious injuries. After that game, his popularity among the girls increased further, and respect and fear among the boys also increased. When the school was over, Saji and Tatsuya left the class together while talking to each other. After reaching the school gate, Saji and Tatsuya went their separate ways. Tatsuya, who spotted Irina, went towards her. When he approached her, he saw that she was talking with someone. To not disturb her, he stood there silently while waiting for them to finish their talk. When they stopped talking, he approached them and said, "Hey Irina, how was your day?" Irina, who heard someone calling her, looked towards the direction of the voice, and once she found out that it was Tatsuya, she humphed and looked away while pouting. Tatsuya went towards Irina and poked her cheeks and said, "I am sorry I didn't tell you about this, as you were very excited for school and would have been disappointed if you knew about this." Even though she heard him apologizing but was still looking away. Seeing her like that, Tatsuya sighed and said, Okay, I will cook anything for you for dinner today, alright? Hearing this, Irina immediately forgave him and hugged him excitedly. Tatsuya also hugged her back but soon separated and asked, "So how was your day? Did you make any friends?" Hearing his question, Irina smiled and said, "Yeah, the school was good, though it would be better if you would have been here too, and yes, I made friends as well." She looked towards a boy with brown hair and said, "Meet my friend Issei." Issei, who was standing there while listening to their conversation, jolted in surprise and said, "Hello, nice to meet you, I am Issei Shidou's friend." Tatsuya, who heard his name, was not that much surprised as he knew that Irina would meet Issei around this time. He was just a bit excited to meet MC of the anime in real life. He moved his hand forward and said, "Tatsuya Shiba, Irina's friend, nice to meet you too." They stood there and talked for a while before going home as both Issei's and Irina's parents came. Both the families introduced themselves, and both Issei's mother and father were surprised when they saw how well-mannered Tatsuya was. They initially thought that Tatsuya was Irina's brother, but Irina immediately denied it. When she realized what she had done, she got embarrassed and hid behind Tatsuya. Seeing her like that, Issei's parents, Grace and Tatsuya, were chuckling. Issei was confused and Tsuji again had a conflicted expression, as even though he was amused seeing her daughter like that, but was also thinking that her daughter was going away from her. After all that, both the families said goodbye to each other, and left, though Grace dragged Tsuji by the ear, much to the amusement of Irina and Tatsuya. Chapter 6. Surprise. After meeting both Saji and Issei, a whole year has passed without much changes in Tatsuya's life. The major change that took place was that Tatsuya is now able to handle Satan class beings easily, and can go toe-to-toe with some lower superclass beings. Issei and Saji hadn't met yet, as even though Tatsuya mostly hangs out with Saji, Issei has already started spouting his love for breasts, and his dream of being a harem king in future, because of which Tatsuya mostly tries to avoid him, and because of that Saji as well didn't meet Issei. Though to Irina, who doesn't understand what was the meaning of those things, thought that Issei was very cool. Even though Tatsuya tried to make her understand that it was bad being near him, she made fun of him and said that he was just jealous of Issei, as many people knew of him because of his antics. Irina's parents too asked Tatsuya about the Issei and were very worried about their daughter. They asked Tatsuya to help her, to which Tatsuya told them his experience about it. They could only sigh and hope that everything would be all right with their daughter. Tatsuya has also started to visit the church along with the Shidous, as Tsuji wanted to bring him on church's side, as he was already very strong for his age, only the amount which he shows to them. He even told him the benefits of joining the church, but still Tatsuya declined. When Tsuji had started to get rather desperate, he was beaten to the pulp by Grace to not disturb Tatsuya. Today, like any other day, Tatsuya woke up, ate his breakfast, went to school, hung out with Saji and returned home. These days Irina had started to ignore him and now spent most of her time with Issei. When Tatsuya returned home in the evening, he first took a bath and then made his dinner and ate it. He was about to go to bed, but he felt a presence in the astral plane. He quickly went to his room, lied on his bed, and turned into his astral projection. When he saw the astral plane, he was quite shocked, as many creatures in the plane appeared to be stronger than the ones he had seen before. He used appraisal just to be sure and was surprised to see that was indeed the case. Even though he can still defeat these creatures with ease, he was still surprised to see that they had gotten stronger. Suddenly he felt a sudden spike in energy, and he immediately came out of his thoughts. He tried to find the magical signature of the source but was unable to. He started flying towards the energy source at his full speed, and after 10 minutes he reached the destination, and was shocked to see the reason for the sudden energy spike. In front of him stood a very familiar orange-colored fox with 9 tails. Seeing him, he started to think that how it was possible, as the being had said that he would not be able to travel to different world, and this world was indeed the DXD world, so how it was happening. But while he was thinking, the fox had already seen him and was about to attack, but stopped when he saw that the human wasn't attacking. Tatsuya was still in deep thought, then suddenly he remembered. Didn't that being said that there were a few surprises? Is it one of them? Just as he thought about it, a note came in his hands. Tatsuya read the note, which said, "Yes, it is." After he read the note, his lips twitched, but he calmed himself down. As soon as he calmed himself, the fox asked, "Hey human, where am I?" When Tatsuya heard the question, he was about to answer, but suddenly he noticed something was different. He realized that the fox in front of him wasn't the one he knew. He wasn't Kurama from Naruto, because the fox has a fucking girl's voice. Tatsuya was again shocked, and this time he was not able to calm himself. Seeing that the human in front of her was not answering, the fox growled and started to release pressure. When Tatsuya noticed the pressure increasing, he came out of his stupor and looked towards the fox and said, "Ah, sorry, I was thinking something. What did you say?" Seeing that the human in front of him wasn't the slightest bit affected by the pressure intrigued the fox, and she again said, "Where am I and who are you?" Tatsuya looked at the fox and said, "We are in the astral plane, and for my identity I am Tatsuya Shiba. Nice to meet you." Tatsuya did a slight bow and smiled at the fox. Seeing the human in front of him, the fox was very amused and said, "Likewise, I am Kurumi, a chakra-tailed beast." After their introduction, Kurumi and Tatsuya started interrogating. After a few hours of question and answers, they both got their conclusions. The conclusion was, they both don't know what is happening. It was clear that Kurumi was not from this world but from a world which was similar to Naruto. The difference was that the world from which Kurumi came was a gender-bended world of Naruto, but in that world the Otsutsuki clan had already destroyed them, so in order to stop them all the tailed beasts, and some powerful shinobis gave her their power to intercept their last attack. When their attacks collided, a huge explosion took place, after which she found herself in the astral plane. Even though they don't understand it, but somehow the explosion opened a portal to this dimension, and she landed in that astral plane. After a moment of silence, Tatsuya asked, "So what would you do now, because as of you are now you cannot leave the astral plane?" After thinking for a while, Kurumi looked at him as if appraising him. She nodded after a while and said, "Okay, Tatsuya, become my Jinchuriki." Tatsuya looked at her for a while and then blinked and shouted, "What?" Kurumi looked at him with an amused expression and said, "I cannot travel to the real world from this plane, but you can, so by becoming my Jinchuriki, I can leave as well, and besides Kurumi turned into a beautiful and voluptuous woman and licked his cheek and said, "The amount of power that you are emitting is making me hot." She had a seductive smile on her face which turned into a gentle smile before saying, "And you don't harbor any ill intentions or negative feelings towards me, so I have no problem being with you for the rest of your life." Tatsuya looked at her for a while and then said, "Before you say anything else, listen, I am not a normal human. I belong to a race called High Human and is basically immortal. So do you still want to be with me?" When she heard that he was immortal, she was quite happy and latched onto him and said, "Then it is even better, I can stay by your side always." Tatsuya, who heard her answer, sighed in defeat and said, "Okay, so what I have to do?" As soon as he asked this question, Kurumi grabbed his face and gave him a deep and passionate kiss and said, "Thank you, now I will be in your care. Do treat me well," and she get absorbed in his body in form of an orange mist. Tatsuya came out of his stupor and said, "That felt nice. Maybe I will try it again sometime." When he said that, a voice came in his mind and said, "Oh, so you liked it, huh? Ask me whenever you want," she said in a sultry voice. Tatsuya nodded and collected all of the leaked chakra before going back. Chapter 7. Sister. After becoming Kurumi's Jinchuriki, 2 months have passed, and during these past 2 months some things have changed for Tatsuya. Firstly, Saji has changed schools as his father moved to another part of the town, so the school life has now become slightly more boring for Tatsuya, though he talks to Kurumi during the school, but still he felt slight lonely as Saji left the school and Irina was rather busy with Issei. But the biggest benefit he got after becoming a Jinchuriki was that now he could use ninjutsu, genjutsu and taijutsu, as he read Kurumi's mind and found all the knowledge on hand signs and the mechanisms of those jutsus. He even created skills after gaining the knowledge that Kurumi possessed. Skills. 1. Hand sign mastery. 2. Gentle fist art. 3. Fuin jutsu. 4. Sharingan eyes. He removed the curse on the eyes and is able to ise all the Mangekyo abilities. 5. Byakugan eyes. 6. Rinnegan eyes. 7. Tensegan eyes. 8. 5 elemental release. 9. Sage mode, gained from Kurumi, which got evolved. 10. Kekiai Genkai, all. 11. Dust release, Kekiai Tota. 12. Tailed Beast Cloak. 13. Tailed Beast Mode. 14. Sage of 6 Path Mode, both Indra and Ashura halves. 15. Gluttony. When he got the power of the eyes, Kurumi got surprised and asked him how did he got them, to which he simply said, "Looks like the powers of those Otsutsuki clan was also present in the astral plane and got absorbed while absorbing your leftover chakra." Hearing his answer, Kurumi thought that it was possible and left it at that. When Tatsuya heard her question about the eyes, he was startled, but when he saw her accepting his answer, he sighed in relief. He also went to the astral plane every night and polished his moves and practiced his jutsus. Now he have no fear of any creature in this universe, as with his 6-path power, he could easily annihilate any superclass being, not to mention Tensigen, with which splitting the even earth in 2 parts is no big deal for him. Even if beings like Ophis or Great Red came after him, he could simply use Kamui and go into his dimension. Just a few years more with his growth rate, he would become a freaking Saitama with some extra added benefits. Right now Tatsuya and Kurumi are arguing. It was now time to cook dinner, but Tatsuya is out of groceries for now. Tatsuya said, "What's the problem? I can just eat cup noodles. Why are you declining to that idea?" "No, you are not eating cup noodles today, you are eating them for the past 3 days, said Kurumi. "What's wrong with cup noodles? It just get the work done." They continued to bicker with each other for a few minutes. Kurumi, who was getting tired with bickering with Tatsuya, got an idea and said, "Okay, if you don't go and buy groceries, then you will not be able to eat coffee jelly as you ate he last one yesterday." Hearing this, Tatsuya got shocked and hurriedly went to change his clothes. He doesn't know if this was because of taking Seiki's powers, but he have a sweet tooth, and just like him, he too liked coffee jelly the most. After buying the groceries on his way home, he was talking to Kurumi about various things when suddenly he felt a mana burst. He hurriedly kept his groceries in his dimensional pocket and ran towards the location. When he reached there, he found a few people covered in ice and a girl who was crouching while holding her head and crying and saying, "Stay away, leave me alone, I didn't do anything, please someone save me." Hearing her voice, a memory came back to me, and I immediately rushed towards her and hugged her and said, "Calm down, it's all right, I am here." Tatsuya stroked her head while saying those words to her silently. As she recognized the voice, she looked up to the person and said, "Oni-sama." Tatsuya looked at her and gave a gentle smile and said, "Yes, it's your Oni-sama Miyuki." Miyuki started crying once again and hugged Tatsuya back. Tatsuya continued to console her while remembering about the memories he gained. When Tatsuya first came to this world, he tried to find about his other family members. He did find some of them, but one member of his family made him shocked. Tatsuya's aunt, who was the same person he had seen in the anime. He thought that other famils of the anime might also be present in this world and tried to find about them as well, but to his luck there were no other families other than his. Though the only difference between his family and the one in the anime was that he wasn't blood related to any of them, as his father was adopted in that family. After Miyuki stopped crying, Tatsuya looked at her and she looked back at him. They stared at each other for a while before Tatsuya broke the silence and asked, "What are you doing here alone, and what happened to you to be in this condition?" On hearing his question, Miyuki looked down for a bit, and then started to explain the situation to him. While Miyuki was at her home, she received the news that her mother died in a plane crash, and just like Tatsuya's case, his family refused to accept her in their family, and was thus put in an orphanage. But the condition in the orphanage, and the treatment she received there was very harsh. She was bullied, starved and made to do manual labor, and that too till she fainted on a daily basis. Not being able to bear that treatment, she ran away from the orphanage. But while she was on the run, she came across some men who thought of selling her. When fear got over her, a wave of blue energy traveled from her body and froze the ones who were approaching her. Hearing her whole story, to say Tatsuya was angry was an understatement. He was fuming with rage and was thinking of destroying both the orphanage and his family, but stopped thinking about that and looked towards Miyuki and patted her head and asked with a gentle smile on his face, "Hey Miyuki, if you don't have anywhere to go, why not stay with me?" Miyuki, who was enjoying her head being patted when heard his brother, was very happy and tears of joy came out of her eyes, and she hugged Tatsuya and said a soft, "Yes," and drifted off to sleep. Chapter 8. I Will Be His Wife. Name: Miyuki Shiba. Age: 4 years. Race: human. HP: 200. MP: 200. CP: 50. CR: 8. AGI: 4. End: 10. Int: 30. Wis: 7. Luck: 58. Skills: Ice Magic. Wind Magic. Miyuki has high magic capacity and also has wind and ice affinity, and if she will be living with Tatsuya, then he needs to seriously train her or she might suffer in the future. After noticing that Miyuki was looking at him, Tatsuya asked, "Are you all right now?" Miyuki just gave a nod and smiled. Tatsuya patted her head and said, "Okay, it seems like you are fine for now." Tatsuya looked at her with a serious expression and said, "Listen Miyuki, you should not tell anything about the blue energy wave to anyone. If you are asked what happened, just say that I saved you. I will tell you about that energy later, okay?" Miyuki also formed a serious expression on her face which just looked cute to Tatsuya and said, "I will not tell about it to anyone, Oni-sama." Tatsuya smiled and said, "Now that this problem is solved, I guess we should do something about your clothes. We will go buy you clothes tomorrow, and you have to be admitted in a school as well. For now, come with me." Tatsuya helped Miyuki to stand up and took her to Shidou residence. He rang the doorbell and waited for a while. Soon the door opened and Grace came into their view. Seeing Grace, Miyuki hid behind Tatsuya. Seeing the two children in front of them, Grace looked at both of them curiously and asked, "What happened, Tatsuya-chan, and who is the girl behind you?" Tatsuya greeted her and said, "Grace, and this girl here is my sister Miyuki. If it would not be a burden, can she borrow some of Irina's clothes?" Grace smiled at him and said, "Of course, come in." Though Grace was a bit confused that Tatsuya had a sister, she still let them in as she knew that Tatsuya is a trustful person. When they entered the house, Tatsuya looked towards Grace and asked, "Is Tuji-san is at home?" Grace nodded and said, "He is in the living room." Tatsuya nodded and looked towards Miyuki and said, "Go together with Grace-san and be a good girl and don't trouble her too much." Miyuki smiled and said, I will be a good girl." Seeing the siblings, Grace chuckled and took Miyuki from there and said, "Now I have a girly daughter, it would be very fun to dress you up, but first you have to take a bath." Grace was very happy right now as she had a chance to have an experience with a girly girl, not a tomboy like her daughter. Seeing her like that, Tatsuya smiled wryly at her and then entered the living room. In the living room, Tuji was watching TV, but when he noticed that someone entered the room, he looked towards the door and found Tatsuya there. Tatsuya also looked at him and greeted him. Tatsuya took a seat in front of him and asked, "Tuji-san, I want to ask a few favors from you." Tuji was very surprised as Tatsuya had never asked for their help, and since he was asking for help, he thought that the matter would be really serious. Tuji also looked towards Tatsuya with seriousness and asked, "Sure, what do you want my help with?" Tatsuya nodded and said, "There is an orphanage that I want you to check that whether it is under church's administration or not, and if it is, can you please destroy it?" Hearing his request, Tuji frowned and said, "You do know that you are asking a church official to destroy a property of the church, right?" Tatsuya nodded and told Tuji about the things that Miyuki have told him. Listening to Tatsuya, Tuji was both angry and ashamed. Angry at the officials who were mistreating the children, and ashamed at himself for not noticing such things. Tuji apologized to Tatsuya and said that he would look into this matter as soon as possible. While they were talking, the door opened and Grace came in the room along with a shy Miyuki who was wearing a cute dress following behind her. Seeing her like that, Tatsuya nodded and said, "You look cute, Miyuki," and smiled at her. Listening to his compliment and seeing his smile, Miyuki blushed and looked down. Seeing her like that, everyone laughed. Tuji introduced himself to Miyuki and also apologized for the treatment she received in the orphanage. Suddenly Tatsuya looked at both the Shidus and asked, Also Tuji-san, can you do the paperwork to make Miyuki attend the same school as me?" Tuji nodded and they continued to talk to them for a while. Grace even asked Miyuki if she wanted to be adopted in their family. When Tatsuya heard this, he had a frown on his face, but he immediately fixed his expression. But his expression was noticed by Miyuki, who was happy that Tatsuya cared about her, and she declined Grace's offer. Soon the time for dinner approached, and Irina also came to the house. Seeing Irina, Miyuki was a bit wary of her but still talked to her while Tatsuya and Grace went to the kitchen to prepare the dinner. While they were eating, Grace asked the question which made all of them choke on their food. Grace looked at the Shiba siblings and said, "It would be very good to have a daughter like Miyuki. Tatsuya, why don't you marry Irina in the future and then Miyuki can live with us?" But as soon as she asked the question, the temperature of the room immediately dropped. Everyone looked towards Miyuki, whose eyes were covered by her hair, and she was mumbling, "Oni-sama wife." Seeing her like that, Tatsuya placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Miyuki, Grace-san is just joking." Feeling Tatsuya's hand on her shoulder, Miyuki came back to reality and nodded and smiled at Tatsuya. She then looked at Irina and said, "I don't know what is your relation with Oni-sama, just be clear that I will be his wife." When she said that, Tatsuya again choked on his food and started coughing. Meanwhile, Irina and Miyuki kept on bickering to each other, with Irina kept on denying that she didn't like Tatsuya and how Issei was better than him, but still was feeling a bit conflicted from inside, and Miyuki explaining how Tatsuya was the best from her past experiences. Seeing both of them like that, the rest of them only smiled and tried to calm them down. Chapter 9. 1 year later and feelings. After the dispute between Miyuki and Irina was over, Tatsuya and Miyuki came back home, and the very next day they went for buying the things that Miyuki required. For some reason, Grace also went with them and was the most excited among the three of them. Seeing her enthusiasm, the people who were around them kept on glancing them from time to time. After going home that day, Miyuki was way too tired, so Tatsuya just explained to her about magic and all, and they decided to practice it daily. Tatsuya also told her made a mental link with Miyuki so that they could talk to each other through telepathy. But what Tatsuya didn't took into consideration was that through his mental link, even Kurumi was able to talk to Miyuki, and therefore Tatsuya had to explain about their relationship. Miyuki and Kurumi argued for quite a while about the whole wife thing, and finally settled on sharing him. From that day onwards, Miyuki started sticking to Tatsuya more and more. She would sleep with him, and even took baths with him as well. Tatsuya had no problems with it, as in his eyes Miyuki was still a child. Miyuki was also trained by Tatsuya from that day too. He would take her for morning workouts to make her body a bit stronger, make her feel magic as she was still not accustomed to it, train her in close combat for self-defense, and much more. The only thing was that even though he himself does not have to train this much, he still was a training maniac, and Miyuki had already started to experience it. Though she was trained to the extreme, she knew that Tatsuya was only doing it because he cared about him. Tatsuya too felt that it was important, as even though he was not allowed to tell her what would happen in the future, he still knew that if Miyuki would not be prepared till that time might lead her to various life and death scenarios. Miyuki was also very talented. Even though she did not had Tatsuya's monstrous growth rate, she was still very talented. She absorbed everything that Tatsuya threw at her just like a sponge, and her conviction to make Tatsuya notice her more drove her even faster to reaching her goal. Because of this training speed, Tatsuya also decided to add sword training in her regime as well. Tatsuya too didn't stood still. He himself started practicing all sorts of weapon and martial arts. He even started learning about various strategies about fighting from Kurumi or from books about various generals which he could get from library or from Tuji. He also started to resume his studies, so that he could gain as much knowledge as he could get, because he knew that in the future it would be very difficult among the various events that would take place. Seeing her Tatsuya like that, Miyuki's and Kurumi's admiration for Tatsuya grew even further. Now Miyuki and Kurumi had set aside their differences, as they knew that they would be with Tatsuya in the future, and now tried to help each other as much as they can. Kurumi even started to teach Miyuki about chakra, but found that Miyuki could only use chakra to enforce her body, and could not use ninjutsu, genjutsu or taijutsu. Though Miyuki was disheartened at first, but with the help of encouragement from both Kurumi and Tatsuya, she overcame it and decided to excel in her own forts and made her Oni-sama proud. Tatsuya also made a special training room like the hyperbolic time chamber with his space-time magic, and started to practice all the weapons and moves he had created from different animes, and hell firing your own Kamehameha was his greatest moment of his life. It was just that it was everyone's dream from the childhood, and now he had accomplished it. During all this time, Irina had also become conscious of Tatsuya, and now had complicated feelings within her. The argument that Miyuki had with her made her realize that she was not the only girl around Tatsuya. Though on the one hand she thought that Issei was cool, but she knew that Issei still thought that Irina was a boy. On the other hand, she knew that Tatsuya had always helped her, and treat her just like a girl she is. She wanted to realize her feelings by being around Tatsuya, but Mikey would always come in her way, and would prevent her from doing so. Seeing her like that, her parents were a bit concerned for her, but could not do anything as she was the one who distanced herself from him and would have to solve it on her own. Just like all this, 1 year passed away. Now Tatsuya and Irina were both 6 years old and Miyuki was 5 years old. Tatsuya had decided to take Miyuki with her in the astral plane, as there are many weak monsters on which Miyuki can practice fighting and get experience. Tatsuya also started to spend some more time with the Shidous, as he knew that the next year they would be going back to England. Tatsuya had also told Miyuki about him being an immortal and a high human, and had promised her that he would make her a high human as well when she would reach high-class level. Thinking about the reward that would make her live with Tatsuya for a very long time, the fire inside her rekindled, and her enthusiasm grew even further. He had also given her a ring that would hide her presence, and would also tell her position to him. She could also use the ring to send a SOS in case of emergencies. The ring also had a huge storage inside it which worked just like his own storage, just that hers was limited. Right now he was out on buying some groceries and some things that Miyuki had asked for. When he was returning home, he came in front of a park. He saw that Irina was there and thought of calling out to her, but stopped when he noticed that she was with Issei. He sighed and left them there. He had warned her many times, but she didn't care about his warnings. Right now it was raining heavily, and the Shiba siblings were having dinner peacefully. Miyuki would often find chances to feed her Oniai-sama, and Tatsuya would wholeheartedly receive her affection, and would even return it by doing the same. Their blissful moment was broken when Tatsuya received a call on his phone. Miyuki was very annoyed and Tatsuya patted her head to comfort her. Tatsuya sighed and looked at his phone, but he got confused as he received the call from Tuji and picked up the call. "Hello," said Tatsuya. On hearing Tatsuya's voice, Tuji asked him in seriousness, "Tatsuya, do you know where Irina is? She still had not came back home yet." Tatsuya found it odd that she still had not came back and said, "No, I don't. Last time I saw her she was with Issei." On receiving the answer, Tuji sighed and said, "Okay, if you find anything about her do tell me." Tuji tried his best, but Tatsuya could still feel that Tuji was very panicked and worried about Irina. Tatsuya used his magic to find Irina and found that she was still in that park. Tatsuya told Miyuki about that and immediately went towards the park. When he reached the park, he found Irina still sitting on the bench. He went towards her and covered her under an umbrella. When Irina felt that someone was in front of her, she looked up and saw that it was Tatsuya. Tatsuya was about to say something, but Irina immediately hugged him and started crying. Tatsuya just stood there and didn't said anything and patted her back. After she calmed down a bit, Tatsuya looked at her and asked, "So wanna tell me what happened?" Irina, who heard him, was a bit hesitant but still told him. Irina told Tatsuya that while they were playing in the park, Issei was still spouting his harem king nonsense. Irina, whose feelings were getting complicated day by day, decided to ask Issei what did he felt about her. Issei, who still thought that Irina was a boy, told her that she was a very good friend and all. Irina, who was a little dissatisfied with his answer, asked him that what would he date her if she was a girl, to which Issei immediately denied, saying that he didn't like boys, and even if she was a girl, she would not be to his liking. Hearing her, Tatsuya was very angry at Issei and wanted to kill him, but calmed himself and consoled Irina, who had again started crying. Tatsuya, who saw that Irina was not stopping, removed her from her embrace and looked at her and said, "Calm down, it's not like he was the only person in the world. It is his loss for losing such an awesome girl like you, Irina. If he cannot accept you for who you are, then he didn't deserve you anyway. Don't be depressed because of him and show him that you can be happy even if you are not with him." Irina, who heard him, stopped crying and nodded and looked down. Tatsuya, who saw that she had calmed down, carried her on his back and took her home. Tuji and Grace thanked him and he went to his home. While he was in the bath along with Miyuki, he noticed that Miyuki was not talking to him like usual, but shrugged it off as he was tired today and thought that he would ask her about it some other time. Unknown to him, his whole confrontation with Irina was known to Miyuki because while he was talking, Kurumi had connected his telepathic link to hers. Hearing Irina's story, Miyuki was very angry at the boy. She also thought that now Irina, who had come to accept her feelings, will come towards Tatsuya, and was thinking whether to accept her or not. She was discussing with Kurumi about this matter, and they both came to the decision to give her a second chance. While both of them were discussing, Tatsuya noticed that his link was connected to hers, and he too heard their discussion and said, "You know, I think I have to prohibit Kurumi from connecting the link as it is a matter of my privacy." When they heard it, both Miyuki and Kurumi, who was inside her, looked down in shame and didn't utter any words. Chapter 10. Author's Note. Many you all think that Irina and the MC pair is bad, and if you all don't like it, then don't worry, she will not be added. Also tell me, which girls do you want in the harem? Chapter 11. Goodbye. After that day, Irina had tried to stick close to Tatsuya like she used to, but Miyuki would interrupt her most of the times, and the times when Miyuki wasn't around, Tatsuya gave her a cold shoulder and treated her the same like when she was his friend. Irina tried her best to change his behavior, but it was all in vain. Tatsuya had also stared to remain expressionless most of the time and only showed his emotions when he was around his family, Shidou, or was eating coffee jelly. Tatsuya had also stated to draw some of the famous manga of his previous world, as his account was starting to get dried up and knew that sooner or later he would have to start making money. Miyuki, who saw his manga getting popular, wanted to brag about her Oni-sama to her friends only to get stopped by Tatsuya, who told her that if others knew about him they would start bothering them and he would not be able to spend much time with her. Hearing his reason, Miyuki frowned and apologized for the mistake she was about to commit, but was also happy to know that Tatsuya wanted to spend more time with her. Miyuki's training had also increased and is now harder than before. She was talented but was still not a high-class level. Her determination had started to decrease, and this was noticed by Tatsuya. He was worried about Miyuki and was wondering about what to do to help her. While he was in a deep thought, Kurumi came to his aid and said that she knew of a way to help him. Tatsuya, who thought that he would be able to help Miyuki, believed her and agreed to whatever she planned, but Tatsuya regretted his choice, and it was too late for him to step back. Though Miyuki was now motivated more than ever, the thing that Tatsuya had to do when she reaches high class was that he had to kiss Miyuki. Tatsuya cursed Kurumi, but Miyuki always made him stop by making seductive noises in his mind. Tatsuya, on hearing those noises, would immediately blush and would start to avoid her by cutting their link. 4 Tatsuya powers were not the only thing that grew at an enormous rate. His body too was maturing very fast, and even though he was between 6 to 7 years old, his outer appearance was like a child of around 9 or 10 years old, and he was on the way where people would start to call him handsome rather than cute. Tatsuya had also nearly completed his high school level studies, and was now teaching Miyuki to also help her. In the school and other places, many boys had tried to come close to Miyuki, but stopped when Tatsuya glared at them, but still some brave fellows thought of testing the waters, and had met their demise by the hands of Tatsuya. Things were similar for the girls who tried to approach Tatsuya, but Miyuki didn't got violent with them and just gave the girls an ice-cold glare which turned into a bright smile whenever Tatsuya looked at her. Time flew by like this, and 1 year had passed, and the time for Irina to go back to England had come. Right now Irina was clinging to Tatsuya like a koala and was crying while Miyuki kept on giving her a death glare, but she ignored it and kept on saying things like she didn't go and all that. Right now Tatsuya and Miyuki were in Shidou residence, and Tatsuya was preparing food along with Grace for the last time. Though they all were sad, but they knew that they had to go back. Irina tried to ask her parents to take both the Shibas with them, but her parents denied, as the reason for which they were going was to train Irina to become an exorcist, and knew it would be dangerous for the siblings. Irina, who heard this, was really disheartened and lowered her head in silence. The next day, in front of Shidou's house, Tatsuya and Miyuki were there saying their goodbyes, but Irina was standing in the corner still looking down. Tatsuya, who saw her like that, went towards her and flicked her forehead with a bit of force. Irina, who received the hit, was hurt and tears were forming at the corner of her eyes. Tatsuya looked at her and said, "What are you being sad for? It's not like we will not meet in future. You can always come back and we will be here anyways." Tatsuya came closer to her and kissed her forehead where he flicked. Irina, who was blushing hard from the kiss, doesn't notice that Tatsuya tied something along her neck. When she came out of her stupor, she looked down and found a silver necklace with a pendant in the shape of angel wings which had a violet gemstone in it, just like the color of her eyes. Irina was about to confess to him but stopped when Tatsuya placed his finger on her lips and said, "Save it for the next time we meet." Irina was blushing but still nodded. Tatsuya went back towards Shidou, who were looking at him, and Grace started to tease him. While this was happening, Miyuki came towards her and looked at her directly in her eyes. Irina too looked at her eyes with seriousness. Both Tatsuya and the Shidou were looking at both of them curiously. Miyuki broke the silence and said, "Even though I don't like you much, but still you were my friend, so I will miss you. But don't expect that I will let you have Oni-sama easily." Miyuki said the last part in a very cold voice, but Irina didn't flinch and said, "Don't worry, I will claim him fair and square." They both glared at each other for a while but dropped it off and started to smile. All of them thought that both of them would come to friendly terms now, but Miyuki said, "While you would be away from Oni-sama till that time, I would be much ahead of you, so you will not stand a chance." Irina, who heard this, frowned, and both of them started to bicker with each other. Seeing both of them, the others sighed but still smiled as they thought that both of them had become closer. They all talked for a while, and later the Shidou left for their flight. Chapter 12. 2 years and trip. After Irina went back to England, Miyuki and Tatsuya started their training once more at a faster pace than before. Miyuki giving her all for the kiss, and Tatsuya doing his training first time with seriousness, as he had encountered a very difficult situation. The thing was that Tatsuya knew all about what would happen in the future, but the problem he encountered was that he doesn't know when the hell those events will happen. He thought that there were some characters that he wanted to save and decided that like most of the MCs in the different fanfics he read and he would save them too. But he forgot that those MCs either had a system which gave them quests to save them or were alone so that they would reach the location of the event as soon as possible, but he didn't had either. He does not have a system which would guide him, and certainly explaining Miyuki and Kurumi about his actions was a no-go, as he was not allowed to disclose any information about the being who sent him in this world. He was in a dilemma and decided to leave it at that and thought that he should prepare himself and Miyuki for the future, rather than worrying about those who he knew nothing about. He would think about it when he will come across such situation. Miyuki and Kurumi, who saw Tatsuya's serious face while training, were mesmerized by him, and it only triggered Miyuki to work even harder than before. Tatsuya had started to teach Miyuki difficult forms of his ain card sword style, and Miyuki was for the first time suffering in her training, but still the reward kept her encouraged to keep on practicing without feeling down. Miyuki had also started learning sensory, teleportation and flight magic, and also really enjoyed the flight training as it was a new experience for her. Tatsuya had also discussed with Miyuki to form his own team, as having some people in the group will be very beneficial in the future. He had also decided to buy the house that the Shidou left and convert it into a small restaurant. Since Shidou had gone now, and he was the one who cooks in the family, his cooking skill had reached that level. Yes, his cooking had reached the foodgasm level. Kurumi, who usually stayed out of their training, had also started to help them train. Though she cannot help Miyuki much, she still helped her, improving her sensory and hiding capabilities, because of which now Miyuki can hide her presence without the ring. Through Tatsuya's harsh yet effective training, both Tatsuya and Miyuki had improved a lot. Tatsuya had now reached the level where he could go toe-to-toe with the dragon gods. He even had some skills that could destroy both of them in an instant. As for Miyuki, she had reached the high-class level even faster than Tatsuya's expectation. When Tatsuya told her that she had reached high-class level and was about to congratulate her further, but was stopped by Miyuki, who suddenly rushed towards him and kissed him on the lips. Tatsuya, who although was surprised, didn't reject her and grabbed Miyuki's waist, and Miyuki, following Jis' example, wrapped her arms around his neck. The promise of her kiss was transformed into a make-out session between them, only to be interrupted by Kurumi, who freed Tatsuya from Miyuki and started her own make-out session, but she was a bit more aggressive than Miyuki. From that day onward, both Miyuki and Kurumi always tried to pin him down while he wasn't busy, but it was a bit difficult for them, as Tatsuya, who had now registered both of them as members of opposite sex, started to calm him down and wait for an appropriate age for the things to go a bit forward, though he too showed them his affection from time to time by hugging them or giving them light pecks so that they don't feel sad. Like this, 2 years have passed, and Tatsuya was now only focusing on training Miyuki and gathering information about the supernal activity taking place around his area. He would often spar with Miyuki, who couldn't land a hit on him and was very annoyed by that fact. While he was looking at some documents, he received a message from the publisher in whose company he used to submit his manga. He read the message and looked towards Miyuki and Kurumi, who were lying on his lap while he was caressing their heads. He asked, "Hey, I need to go to Kyoto for some reason of my manga? Do you want to come with me? There will be a festival there as well. We can visit the festival after my work is over." Hearing him, both of them perked up, especially Miyuki, who was imagining the beautiful time she would spend with Tatsuya. Kurumi and Tatsuya were also feeling the same, as it would be their first time seeing a festival after coming to this world. Chapter 13. Meeting the Foxes. After it was approved that the Shiba family would be visiting Kyoto, both Miyuki and Kurumi started packing for their trip to Kyoto. They were very excited, as it would be their first time going on a trip, and were unable to contain their excitement. While they both were doing the packing, Tatsuya was reading some documents and contracts. He had finally decided to build his own restaurant and was reviewing the contracts and other documents before signing it. He had decided to start the work as soon as possible after coming back from Kyoto. Finally, the day for their trip to Kyoto came, and all three of them, yes, three, even Kurumi was in her human form, as she too wanted to enjoy the trip. They waited for the train, and when the train arrived, they all took their seats. During their journey, many guys came and tried to hit on Kurumi. Some perverts even tried to hit on Miyuki as well, but were all nearly pissing themselves as Tatsuya gave all of them a death glare. Seeing him like that, both the girls shifted on their seats and leaned over his shoulder. Seeing the girls' action, Tatsuya sighed and wrapped his arms around them. When the train arrived at Kyoto, they came out and met with the people who came to escort him to the hotel. After reaching the hotel, they were given their room keys, and he got one double bedroom just like he had requested. The hotel also had an onsen, which they all enjoyed thoroughly, and after enjoying, they all crashed onto their beds as Tatsuya had to go for the meeting the next day. The meeting was very boring, but still Tatsuya remained attentive during the whole meeting. After the meeting was over, Tatsuya bid farewell to the others and arrived at the hotel where he found Miyuki and Kurumi already prepared for going OU sightseeing. Seeing that how excited both of them were, Tatsuya hurriedly went inside the room to change his clothes and came out. They were walking around the city with both Miyuki and Kurumi dragging Tatsuya. Seeing both of them like that, Tatsuya only gave them a wry smile. The people who saw the three of them, even though they were envious of Tatsuya, were still pitying him. While they were enjoying the town, suddenly Tatsuya heard someone crying. He looked around, but saw that no one was there. He tried to focus to find the direction of the sound. Seeing Tatsuya, the girls stopped on their tracks and were trying to notice what Tatsuya was doing. Once Tatsuya found the direction of the sound, Tatsuya started following it, and the two girls who were still confused but still followed him. After walking some distance, Kurumi too heard the voice and now knew what Tatsuya was doing and told about it to Miyuki. They kept on walking, and the volume kept on increasing. They reached the source of voice and found a small girl probably 4 years old with blonde hair and shrine maiden clothes crying and kept on mumbling, "Okasa." They approached the girl and Tatsuya crouched down to her level and patted her shoulder to get her attention. The girl who was crying looked up and saw a boy looking at her. Tatsuya looked at the girl with a small smile and asked, "What happened?" Even though he knew she most probably had lost her mother in the crowd, but still he knew that asking her about it would make her feel a bit relieved. The girl sniffed and said, "I cannot find Okasan," and started crying again. Tatsuya took out his handkerchief and wiped her tears. He patted her head and asked in a calm and kind voice, "How about we help you find your mother?" Hearing this, the girl stopped for a while and stared at Tatsuya, who was looking at her with a kind expression on his face. Tatsuya, who was looking at the girl, was thinking, "I didn't expected to meet her this soon." He had already sensed it, and it looked like the two behind him had sensed it too. The girl was none other than the yokai princess Kunou, a 9-tailed fox. Kurumi, who sensed her, was looking at her curiously, as it was her first time meeting a 9-tailed fox other than her. Kunou, who was still looking at Tatsuya, nodded. Seeing her approve, Tatsuya stood up and said, "I am Tatsuya Shiba, nice to meet you, and these two are my companions Miyuki and Kurumi." Both Miyuki and Kurumi waved at her. Kunou also wiped her tears and said, "My name is Kunou and thank you for helping me, Tatsuya." Tatsuya, who heard her calling, Tatsuya, cutely patted her head unconsciously, and Kunou too, who was being patted, was in a bliss. Tatsuya stopped and asked her how did she got separated from her mother, to which Kunou said that she was walking along with her mother, but she started to walk in a different direction when she smelled something good and when she noticed she could not find her mother. Listening to her, Tatsuya thought for a while and then picked her up and put her on his shoulders and said, "We will walk around here, and if you find your mother just tell us, okay? And oh, I put you on my shoulders because there was a possibility that you could get lost again if you smelled something good again." Kunou, who heard him, got embarrassed and started hitting his head while pouting. Seeing both of them, Miyuki and Kurumi laughed, and Miyuki even took a picture of both of them. While walking around, Tatsuya and the other bought various foods and other things. Kunou, who was sitting on Tatsuya's shoulders, was eating cotton candy that Tatsuya was holding while Tatsuya was being fed by both Miyuki and Kurumi from time to time. Kunou was enjoying a lot as it was the first time that she interacted with people like this and not like a princess. Miyuki would take pictures of all of them from time to time. She even took some embarrassing pictures so that she could tease them in future. While they were walking, suddenly Kunou gripped Tatsuya tighter and said, "Tatsuya I Okasan there." Tatsuya, who heard her, looked in the direction she was pointing and saw a beautiful and busty woman with blonde hair and wearing a yellow kimono which was trying its best to hide her chest. She was looking very worried and was desperately finding something. Tatsuya took Kunou of his shoulders and lightly pushed her forward and said, "Go." Hearing him, Kunou nodded and ran towards her while shouting, "Okasan." When Yasaka heard a voice she was very familiar with, she looked in that direction and saw her daughter running towards her. She rushed towards Kunou and hugged her tightly while crying along with Kunou. After they had calmed down, Kunou told her what happened. Yasaka looked towards the three of them and came towards them and bowed her head and thanked them. They all waved their hands and said that it was all right. Yasaka looked up and introduced herself. "My name is Yasaka and I am Kunou's mother. I thank you very much for helping my daughter. Is there any way in which I can repay the favor?" Tatsuya said that it was all right, but she kept on insisting. Finally, sighing in defeat, Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Can you ask someone to guide us around Kyoto? As you can see, we are just tourists here and don't know the area so well." It would be great help if you can. Listening to his request, Yasaka smiled and said, Don't worry, I would find someone to guide you tomorrow, just tell me your hotel name and phone number. Tatsuya nodded and they both exchanged their phone numbers and Tatsuya gave the details which she asked about. After that was over, Yasaka invited them for dinner, to which Kunou too insisted. After they agreed with her, Tatsuya was again dragged along the way, this time by Kunou, and the other three were laughing on seeing both of them. During the dinner all of them were happily talking to each other and Miyuki also showed them the pictures that she had taken, and most of them were very embarrassing for Kunou, who was now red with embarrassment but was still holding on as Tatsuya was petting her head to make her calm down. Yasaka too, just like her daughter, was happy as she was also enjoying her time like that and was also happy to see her daughter smile. When they reached back to their hotel, Tatsuya turned towards Kurumi and asked, So what do you think, can you beat her, Yasaka? As she too is a nine-tailed fox. Kurumi gave him a confident smile and said, Of course I can, and besides you are with me as well and together we can beat anyone. She pulled Tatsuya on the bed along with her and Miyuki, and they both snuggled closer to him. Tatsuya just sighed and smiled and then said, That's true, and drifted off to sleep. Chapter 14. The Festival 1. The next day Tatsuya, Miyuki and Kurumi were waiting for the guide who would be escorting them around Kyoto. After a while Tatsuya received a message from Yasaka stating that she had found the guide and the guide was waiting for them outside the hotel. The three of them stood up and went outside the hotel. As soon as they stepped outside the hotel, Tatsuya was tackled by white blur, but still Tatsuya didn't tell down. Tatsuya looked down to see Kunou, who was smiling and rubbing her head on his stomach while clinging to him like a koala. Tatsuya smiled looking at her and patted her head. Kunou, who received the head pat, didn't say anything and was enjoying it. Yasaka came towards them and said, Good morning to you all. I hope that you all are ready for sightseeing. Yasaka looked and all of them and smiled. They all nodded and smiled as well. Miyuki looked around but saw that no one around them. She then looked towards Yasaka and asked, Where is the guide that you talked about? Yasaka was about to answer her, but before that Kunou rose her hand and said, My mother and me will be your guide. No one knows about the places better than her. She said that and puffed her chest, feeling proud about it. They all giggled at her actions and the three of them bowed towards Yasaka and said, Then we will be in your care today. Yasaka also bowed towards them and said, Yes, take care of me as well. While they were doing all this, Kunou was pouting and looked away from them. Seeing her actions, Tatsuya smiled and said, Of course we would be counting on Kunou too. As he said that, Kunou looked at them with a proud full look and said, Of course I would be guiding you as well. Kurumi looked at her and said, Okay, we will be in your care too, Kunou-chan. While this was happening, Miyuki took pictures of Kunou when she was pouting and thought of teasing her later. During the sightseeing, many men were glaring daggers at Tatsuya for being surrounded by beautiful women. Some pervs were even eyeing Miyuki and Kunou. Seeing them like that, Tatsuya just gave a death glare to all of them, and all those men averted their eyes. Seeing her actions, the girls were grateful, except Kunou, who don't even know what was happening. Even Yasaka was grateful. No woman wants to be stared at by lecherous gazes, and Yasaka, who was used to being stared because of her beauty, was very relieved and felt happy. Miyuki and Kurumi tried to get close to Tatsuya and hold his hands. Seeing that both of them were trying to grab Tatsuya's attention,
Chapter
Kunou
15,
came and tried to grab his attention
too,
and asked
Yasaka,
Tatsuya
who
to
was
lift her
standing
on
in
his
front of
shoulders like
Tatsuya,
yesterday.
shook her head
and
sat
Tatsuya
beside
gave
him.
Miyuki and
They
Kurumi
both
a
were
helpless
sitting
smile
quietly
and
with their
lifted up
heads
Kunou
resting
on
on
his
the
shoulders.
shoulders.
Even
Yasaka
though the
broke
girls
the
were
silence
pouting
and
and
said,
looked away,
"Thank
but
you,"
knew that
in a
Kunou
low
just
voice,
wanted
but
to enjoy
Tatsuya
her
still
rare
held
outing
her
with
and looked
Tatsuya,
towards
who
her.
was acting like her
Yasaka,
brother.
who felt him
Both
looking at her,
Miyuki
looked
and
back at
Kurumi
him
looked
and
at Kunou
smiled.
with envy.
Tatsuya was
Kunou, who
mesmerized
noticed
by her
them
smile,
looking at her,
but
stuck
soon
out her
composed
tongue
himself
towards
and
them.
asked,
This
"Why
made
are you
both of them
thanking me?
twitch their lips,
It is
and
us
both
who
of
should
them
be
thanking
thanking
you
you
for
for
taking
Tatsuya
such good
and
care
grabbed
of
his
us.
arms."
Tatsuya too
Tatsuya, who
smiled
was literally
sincerely
covered
at
by
her,
girls,
and
can
now it
only
was her
give
turn
out
to
to
be
be
mesmerized,
mesmerized,
but
but
she
she
too
too
composed
composed
like they
herself.
wanted.
Yasaka
Seeing
shook
their
her head
antics,
and said,
Yasaka chuckled,
"I am
but
thanking
also
you for
felt a
helping
bit
and
envious
spending
of them.
time with
And
Kunou,
Kurumi,
she
who was
seemed to be
sensitive to
sincerely
people's
happy
emotions,
when she
looked
was with
towards
you.
Yasaka
All I have
with a
never seen her
mischievous
smile this
expression on
much."
seeing which
That
Yasaka
poor child
immediately
doesn't have a
averted her
father or
eyes.
brother to play
They
with,
kept on
and I am
touring
mostly
around the
busy
town,
with my
and
work,
just
so
like
I am
yesterday,
really grateful
kept on
for all
eating
this.
everything they thought would be
Tatsuya, who
delicious.
looked at Yasaka with
Seeing
sympathy,
the amount
said,
of food the
"You don't
three
need
of
to
them,
be
along
grateful
with
to us.
Kunou, were eating
We as well, your
Yasaka
company
could
a lot
only
enjoyed,
sighed.
and we can
She had
understand her
decided that
situation
she
well
had
as
to
both
ban
me
Kunou
and
from
Miyuki have
eating
lost our
snacks for a
parents,
while.
and you don't need to
Just
worry
like
about
that evening,
Kunou
just
came,
like
and
Yasaka
she too
have
turned
someone
towards
to
the
depend on in the form of her mother. We have seen all the local attractions, so you should not blame yourself too much. Is there anything specific that you want to do? Tatsuya said that, both Kurumi and unconsciously began thinking what to do. Yusaka, who received the head pat, was a bit surprised and said, but didn't reject it. You both really forgot that we came here to attend the festival. It has been a long time since somebody was showing her affection with a deadpan and so she was savoring this feeling. And both of them just laughed awkwardly. After some time, Tatsuya noticed what he was doing. While they were walking towards the place where the festival would take place, they came across a rental yukata was a bit disappointed and the girls when he insisted on wearing a yukata, but the embarrassed expression on Tatsuya's usually calm and collected face was a great sight to her, and she decided to leave Tatsuya alone. Thinking that she has teased the boy in front of her sat alone in the corner of the store and leaned against the wall. I have noticed it for a while and have been meaning to ask this, but aren't you? Someone was coming towards him, but he didn't open his eyes and said, "All right? Are you not going to change?" Who heard her again got calm. He opened his eyes and saw that we treat each other as siblings, we are still non-blood related cousins, so our relationship is okay. She has been living with me after her parents died, and because of this we are very close as we are the only ones left in each other's family, and that closeness caused us to have feelings for each other. But I most certainly don't mind being in relationship with such a cute girl like her. Yusaka smiled, and they both started making some small talk until the others came back. When they came back, Tatsuya was once again stunned when he saw them in their yukatas. And the girls did their best to show their beauty to Tatsuya. Seeing them like that, Yusaka chuckled and took a picture of them. Miyuki wore a sky blue-colored yukata which even though was simple but still complemented her beauty. Kurumi wore a blood-red-colored one, and even though it revealed quite a bit of her chest it still have her the aura of maturity which made her both beautiful and seductive. Kunou was wearing a pink-colored yukata, and she was looking way too cute. Tatsuya came out of his trance and complimented each of the girls, and it made them very happy. They went to the festival after changing into their yukatas, and there too they all started eating. Seeing them like that, Yusaka could only sigh but was still enjoying it along with them as well. They also participated in many games, and the vendors were very troubled because of them as they almost won most of the prizes, and the vendors had to beg them to stop. Many bold guys tried to hit on the girls, but one glare from Tatsuya, and they returned back without causing any trouble. While the time for the fireworks was approaching closer, Kunou was looking a bit restless. Tatsuya, who noticed this, looked at her and asked, "What happened?" Kunou was a bit hesitant to tell him, but the sincere look of worry in his eyes made her unable to, and she said, "I need to go to the washroom." The others who heard her had a sweat drop and were thinking why was she so hesitant to tell them. Yusaka sighed and took her to the washroom. After a while the fireworks show started, but there was still no sign of Yusaka or Kunou. Noticing this, both Tatsuya and Kurumi got concerned and spread their senses to search for them. Once they found out, Tatsuya immediately sent a message to Kurumi to protect Miyuki while he was gone. Kurumi wanted to retort but decided against it as she could see that Miyuki was enjoying the show and didn't want it to worry her. Tatsuya went to a corner and teleported to Yusaka's location. There he saw an old storehouse. He could feel many presences inside. He activated his Byakugan to see what was going on inside, but immediately frowned and ran towards the storehouse. He kicked the door open and saw many yokai in there. All of them looked towards the broken door and saw someone standing there. A random yokai released his aura to scare the person, but the person didn't flinch. Seeing this, he got irritated and said, "Oi, who the hell are you? How dare you come here? Do you want to die?" The person, or more clearly Tatsuya, didn't said anything and started walking towards them. Say of the yokai who saw this started to get nervous, but most of them got enraged and started releasing their aura to scare him. Tatsuya saw that the yokai were trying to intimidate him, but it was all in vain. Tatsuya, who started to get impatient, thought that he should finish them soon. He released some of his aura and said while raising his hand, "Gale style, laser circus." Numerous beams launched from Tatsuya's hand and started moving towards the yokai at incredible speed. The yokai were still shocked, and on seeing the humans still not intimidated by them, and felt the huge aura coming out of him, were not able to move when the beam was launched towards them. By the time they realized, it was already too late as the beam pierced through their chest, killing all of them in process. Confirming that all of them were dead, Tatsuya moved towards the room in which he felt Yusaka's presence. Chapter 16. Festival 3. While Yusaka took Kunou to the washroom, she didn't notice that some people were following her. While Kunou was in the washroom, she went towards a tree and sat under it. She placed her hand on her head where Tatsuya had patted her and rubbed it unconsciously. A smile appeared on her face, and she started remembering all the things that she did with Tatsuya during the day. Suddenly she felt that something was about to hit her, and she immediately disappeared from that spot, and the spot where she was sitting now had several knives stuck in the tree. If she hadn't moved, she would have injured her shoulder. She narrowed her eyes and said in a cold voice, "Who dares to attack me? Come in front of me right now." She more like demanded it. Suddenly she was attacked from every direction, but Yasaka didn't flinch and made a barrier around her. Well, nothing less to be expected from the leader of the yokai faction. Suddenly a man with a huge stature appeared and stood in some distance from Yasaka, while looking at her with a smirk on his face. Yasaka, who recognized the man, had an enraged expression on her face. She started to release her aura and asked in a cold and angry tone, "What are you doing here, and how dare you attack me? You do know that attacking me would lead you to serious consequences, right?" The man, who was most probably a yokai, started laughing maniacally. Yasaka, who was trying to figure out why he was doing it, but the man stopped laughing and answered her queries. The man looked at Yasaka with an excited expression and said, "There will be no consequences because as of today I would be the leader of the faction after I kill you." Yasaka, who heard this again, narrowed her eyes and said, "You should stop daydreaming. You know better than anyone else that you cannot defeat me, and because of that attitude of yours you were not made the leader." The man got enraged and gave Yasaka a hateful glare and said, "Those damn geezers think that you were a better choice than me, huh? I will deal with them once I am done with you." Yasaka didn't said anything and stared, attacking him with her senjutsu. The man also didn't stood still and stared his own attacks towards her. After a couple of minutes of fighting, the man was on the ground, and Yasaka looked at him coldly and said, "Surrender now and I can guarantee that you will not be killed." The man, when heard this, snorted and said, "Still acting mighty as always, huh? Let's see what you can do now." The man made a bright flash and blinded Yasaka's vision. Yasaka, who was expecting an attack, immediately made a barrier around her, but she didn't felt that any attack hit her barrier. She opened her eyes and saw that she was surrounded by many yokai who were ready to attack her any time. She also noticed that the man had also disappeared from his place. Yasaka was about to attack the yokai but stopped when she heard the man's voice. "I don't think that it is a good idea to attack us. At least look behind first." Yasaka turned around with an angry expression on her face, but her face immediately turned into one with worry. "Not so high and mighty now, eh?" The man standing behind her was the same man she was fighting a bit ago, and he had captured Kunou and was pointing a blade on Kunou's neck. Kunou's mouth was already gagged and she was also tied up with restraining chains. Seeing her daughter like that, Yasaka stopped and said, "Leave my daughter out of this. She has nothing to do with your goal." Yasaka was very angry but calmed herself down for the sake of her daughter. The man looked at Yasaka with amusement and said, "How is she not involved with my goal? Isn't she the princess of yokai? This means that eliminating her is also very important for my goal." Hearing this, Yasaka again tried to attack him, but the man said, "Don't try to do something stupid. You don't want any bloodshed, do you?" He moved the blade closer to Kunou's neck and some blood came out. Yasaka immediately stopped and said, "I will do anything you want, just leave my daughter alone." Kunou, who heard this, wanted to refute her but was not able to speak anything. You will do anything I say, is that right?" The man turned towards one of his subordinates and gestured him something. The subordinate nodded and moved towards Yasaka and bound her with restraining chains. "Now you would not be able to do anything unnecessary." He looked towards his subordinates and said, "Men, take her to the headquarters. We still require her to be used as the bargaining chip against those geezers." Like that they reached the old storehouse and Yasaka and Kunou were thrown in the room which the man entered. Kunou kept on crying and was trying to say something but was unable to. She kept on praying for someone to help her and her mother and thought of Tatsuya. Yasaka was worried about Kunou and was thinking of ways to free her out of this situation, but nothing came to her mind. The man had sent some of his subordinates to inform the yokai faction about the situation and his demands, and was now waiting for them to respond. The man took a seat on a chair and started waiting. After a while, the man got bored and looked towards Yasaka and Kunou. He looked at them for a while and then a maniac-like expression appeared on his face. The man stood up and walked towards the mother and daughter. When he approached them, he raised both of their chins with his fingers and said, "You know what, you don't look bad. I guess we can have a little fun before the people of the faction arrives." Hearing him, Yasaka got panicked and said, "You can do anything you want to me, but please don't touch my daughter, she is just a kid," Yasaka said with tears flowing from her eyes. Kunou didn't know what was happening, but when she saw her mother crying, she knew that whatever the man meant by fun was not good for them at all. The man laughed like a sinister and threw Kunou away. When Yasaka saw the man coming closer to him, she knew that she was about to be ravaged. She closed her eyes and silently crying so as to not make Kunou even more worried. She too was praying for someone to help her as she was very scared. Just as the man was about to tear Yasaka's kimono, someone kicked open the door. All of them looked towards the door and saw someone standing there. When the dust cleared, Yasaka and Kunou widened their eyes when they saw who was standing there. It was none other than the person they were hoping for. Tatsuya. Chapter 17. Festival 4. After killing all the yokai in the room, Tatsuya went towards the room from where he felt Yasaka's and Kunou's presence. He got closer to the door and kicked it open. When the dust cleared, Tatsuya saw what was happening in the room and got enraged. He saw both Yasaka and Kunou tied up and were restrained by some sort of chains. But the thing which made him enraged was that the man in front of him was about to rape Yasaka. Tatsuya looked at the man coldly and had decided that he would not give an easy death, like the one he gave to other yokai, to him. The man who was about to rape Yasaka was shocked when the door was broken and a man came, but he was confident that he could defeat him as he was just a human. But when he noticed the cold glare that Tatsuya gave him, he shuddered and began sweating. Even though he was a bit more serious than before, but he still believed that he could beat Tatsuya. He looked at Tatsuya with anger and asked, "Who the hell are you, bastard? How dare you ruin my fun time with this bitch?" And just like that he kept on spouting nonsense and bad-mouthing Yasaka. Tatsuya, who was getting more and more angry, kept walking towards him. Seeing that Tatsuya was not going to answer him, the man started to release his aura. Feeling the pitiful amount of aura that the man was releasing to intimidate him, Tatsuya stopped on his tracks, looked down and started to think of a way to give him the worst death possible, but to the others it seemed that Tatsuya was scared. Seeing him stop, Kunou and Yasaka started shedding tears as they were feeling bad for involving Tatsuya in this mess. The man who saw that Tatsuya stopped thought that he got scared. The man had a smirk on his face, but it immediately turned into a frown by the next action that Tatsuya did. Tatsuya, who now had thought of a plan, couldn't help but give a sinister smirk. Seeing his smirk, the man got enraged and said, "You dare to laugh at me? The great me!" The man shouted and launched an attack towards Tatsuya. Seeing the man attack Tatsuya, Kunou and Yasaka closed their eyes as they didn't want to see him die. Suddenly a loud shriek was heard by them, but the voice didn't belong to Tatsuya. They both looked towards them and saw that Tatsuya was holding the man's fist and was crushing it while looking down, and the man was on his knees and was trying to endure the pain. Tatsuya then looked up and directly looked in the man's eyes with his Rinnegan activated. The man and the other two were surprised at this development. The man who was being stared at by those eyes thought that those eyes could see through his soul. Tatsuya, who was crushing his hand, released him and opened his palm, aiming at him, and said, "Shinra Tensei," and the man was thrown towards the wall with a great force. Tatsuya walked towards Kunou and brought her close to Yasaka. He looked at both of them with a reassuring smile and said, "Wait for a bit, I will free you after killing this shit soon." He stood up and walked towards the man while both Kunou and Yasaka kept on looking at his back. The man who was smashed in the wall stood up and was now completely serious. He looked towards Tatsuya with a hateful expression and said, "I will kill you," and used his senjutsu to attack him. Tatsuya once again pointed his palm in the attack's direction and absorbed them. The man was stupefied by this act and was now thinking of a way to get out of this situation, but his thought was cut off by Tatsuya, who said, "You cannot get out of this situation." Tatsuya, who heard his thoughts with his telepathy, thought of scaring him a bit. The man, when heard Tatsuya's word, had become pale. He understood that Tatsuya could hear his thoughts as well. Tatsuya smiled at him, but this smile gave him deep chills. As if the man had some doubts about Tatsuya's mind reading were cleared when Tatsuya said, "Yeah, I can hear." The man knew that he was in deep shit now. Tatsuya again gave him a glare, but this time he also released his killing intent as well. The man who was experiencing all this was now literally pissing his pants. Tatsuya absorbed all the chakra present in his body with his Rinnegan and started smashing him to the ground or wall by his telekinesis, but stopped after a while. The man's face was now unrecognizable. The man was lying on the floor with all his bones broken and his body covered in blood. Tatsuya walked to the man and grabbed his head by his hair and looked directly in his eyes, but this time activating his EMS and used Tsukiyomi on him. Even though it was Tsukiyomi, but it was Tatsuya's Tsukiyomi, and there is only one thing that could be said about his Tsukiyomi. It was a man's greatest nightmare. Tatsuya can use the normal Tsukiyomi as well, but he has also created his own special torture Tsukiyomi as well. Inside the man's mind he could see and feel the pain of his getting chopped off and his body pierced with swords for 3 days, but outside only 10 seconds have passed. The man got back his consciousness, was breathing very heavily, and looked towards Tatsuya with fear in his eyes. Tatsuya looked at the man for a while, and thought that it was enough for him. He stood up and started walking away, much to the relief of the injured man. But before he could celebrate, Tatsuya again looked back at him and said, "Amaterasu." The man was engulfed in black flames and was crying and shouting in pain. Tatsuya went towards Yasaka and Kunou and freed them and was immediately hugged by the both of them. Both Yasaka and Kunou started crying in his embrace, but he didn't said anything and let them cry to their heart's content. After a while they had stopped crying, and Tatsuya looked down and saw both of them sleeping in his embrace. He gave a tired sigh and gave a telepathic message to Kurumi telling her about the situation, and also told them to come back to the hotel soon as he was going to take them back there, as he didn't know where they lived. Tatsuya used his time alteration, Seiki's skill, and fixed their clothes and appearance and teleported back to his room. Chapter 18. Sorry, I changed my mind. The next morning when Yasaka woke up, she felt that someone was clutching her hand tightly. She turned her head and saw the one who was clutching her was none other than her daughter Kunou. When she saw Kunou, everything that happened yesterday came back to her and she hugged Kunou tightly. A few minutes later she thought that it wasn't her room and started looking around. She looked at her other side and saw Miyuki was sleeping beside her. Her gaze again shifted and landed on Tatsuya, who was sleeping on a chair. She remembered how he protected her and Kunou and couldn't help but blush thinking about his fight. She looked at him affectionately but was brought out of her thoughts by a voice. "So you fell for him as well, huh?" When Yasaka turned her head, she saw Kurumi looking at her with a mischievous expression and a smug on her face. Yasaka's blush deepened, but she didn't deny her statement. Soon the others started waking up. When Tatsuya woke up, he was immediately tackled by Kunou in a hug and she started crying again. Seeing her cry, Tatsuya only consoled her, and after a while she stopped crying but still didn't leave Tatsuya. Tatsuya didn't have any problems with that and looked towards Yasaka. Yasaka, who had calmed herself down, looked at Tatsuya with seriousness and asked, "Who are you? No, what are you and what is your purpose of coming to Kyoto?" She looked at Tatsuya with a cold gaze so as to intimidate him, but Tatsuya remained calm and said, "I am a human and we came here on a trip, though I had a meeting on the first day." Yasaka, who didn't found any lie in his words, sighed and said, "I know this is late, but thank you for saving me and my daughter yesterday. If you didn't come, who knows what could have happened?" She said the last part with a bit of fear in her voice. Tatsuya, who heard her, shook his head and said, "Okay, I will go out, you guys should change, and we will go and have some breakfast after that." Tatsuya stood up, freed himself out of Kunou's grasp much to her disappointment, and left the room. Everyone looked at him go out and close the door. Once the door was closed, Miyuki got up and took out some clothes from her ring and gave them to Yasaka and Kunou. Yasaka got Kurumi's clothes and Kunou got Miyuki's clothes, though it were a bit big for her. Yasaka looked at the clothes which she and Kunou got and changed its size with her magic. While they were changing, Kunou suddenly said, "Mom, when I will grow up, I will marry Tatsuya," and smiled. Listening to her, Miyuki suddenly stopped changing and looked towards Kunou and said in a calm yet in an angry tone, "Sorry Kunou, you can't, because I will be marrying Oni-sama in future." When Kunou heard this, she looked towards Miyuki fiercely and said, "No, he will be my mate." Soon they both started lashing out at each other. Kurumi looked at the scene with amusement, but Yasaka was very troubled on seeing them. She too wanted to show her feelings but was feeling complicated as she was already married and was thinking whether Tatsuya would accept her or not. Kurumi, who felt the change in her emotions, put her hand in Yasaka's shoulders and gave a reassuring smile and said, "Don't worry, just stay true to yourself, even I am his mistress." Hearing Kurumi reassuring her, she felt a bit happy but was also annoyed as she too was in a relationship with Tatsuya. Yasaka sighed and left the room in which Kurumi has also started arguing with them, as Kunou heard that Kurumi also wanted to be with Tatsuya. Once she closed the door, she found Tatsuya leaning against the wall. On noticing her, Tatsuya stood straight and walked towards her. When he reached there, she looked towards Yasaka and asked, "So where are the others?" Even though Tatsuya already knew what was happening inside with the help of his telepathy, he still asked her. Yasaka looked at him and said, "They are inside the room fighting about who will be your wife in future. Aren't you very popular with girls?" Yasaka, who was depressed, thought of lightening her mood by teasing Tatsuya. Tatsuya only sighed and said, "You don't need to hide your fear, you know." Yasaka's, who heard him, frowned but regained his normal expression soon and asked, "What are you talking about?" Tatsuya still looked at her and said, "You can drop the act. I know you are scared by yesterday's events. I won't blame you though that you want to show that you are strong in front of Kunou, but remember you too have feelings, so show them. Even Kunou wouldn't want to see you sad." He moved closer to her, patted her head and gave her a gentle smile. Yasaka, who heard what Tatsuya said, couldn't help and hugged him and started crying in his embrace. Tatsuya just sighed and continued to caress her head. He thought that Yasaka was a very strong woman to keep all those feelings buried inside her and still act normal. Once Yasaka calmed down, Tatsuya looked at her and tried very hard to hold his laughter. Yasaka's face was completely puffed and all the crying and snot made her look very funny. Yasaka, who saw Tatsuya trying to hold back his laugh after looking at her face, got embarrassed and started hitting him lightly and buried her head in his chest. Tatsuya apologized and wiped her face with his handkerchief. Just as he was about to leave her embrace, Yasaka hugged him tightly and said, "Can we stay like this for a bit?" Tatsuya sighed and he nodded and patted her head. He knew that he would be scolded by Miyuki, but still he didn't left Yasaka alone, as he knew that she didn't have anyone to depend upon. Yasaka had many responsibilities. To take care of her daughter and her faction alone without depending on anyone was a very difficult job, but she still tried her very best to do all that. But even then everyone needs someone to rely upon, and Yasaka felt that she could rely on him. Yasaka had now completely calmed down, and was now back to her cheerful and playful self. She looked at him and said, "You know, while they are arguing amongst themselves, why not I take you for myself?" Just as she said that, the door burst open and a unified "No" was heard. Miyuki and Kunou started to argue with Yasaka, but she was very calm. Kurumi stepped closer to Tatsuya and said, "So you noticed it too, huh?" Tatsuya turned towards her and said, "Yeah, yesterday when I reached there I saw her face full of fear, and I know that she could not overcome her fear. It would have consumed her if she hadn't released all that of her chest." Kurumi, who heard him, only smiled and thought that she was correct on choosing him as her partner. She walked closer to him, grabbed his face, and gave him a deep kiss. The others stopped arguing and looked towards the both of them with widened eyes. Kurumi released him from the kiss and said, "Miyuki, sorry, I have changed my mind. Now I too will now aim to be his wife." She said that with smug on her face and enclosed Tatsuya in a hug. The others, who came out of the shock, jumped on them while saying things like they would not let it happen and all that. Meanwhile, Tatsuya, about whom all this was going on about, is choked by 4 girls and was trying very hard to hold on to his dear life. Chapter 19. Going back. Tatsuya somehow escaped the 4 of them and went to eat breakfast alone. After he was done eating, he went back to his room to find the girls talking and laughing together. He sighed in relief as they had stopped bickering with each other and were being friendly. After a while, Yasaka asked Tatsuya and the others whether they wanted to see the yokai territory, to which they all agreed. When they reached the yokai territory, many yokai guards were very of them, and some even pointed their weapons at them, only to receive a cold glare from Tatsuya which shut them up. Yasaka assured everyone that they were not suspicious and were her guests. When they reached Yasaka's quarters, they saw many yokai there, probably worried about their leader because of yesterday's events. Yasaka and Kunou took their time to assure everyone that they were fine. Yasaka then took them to a big hall where many old yokai were present. They started to discuss about the incident that occurred yesterday, and once the discussion was over, all the elders bowed and showed their gratitude towards Tatsuya. Tatsuya also asked them to keep his and his friend's identity a secret, as he didn't want to involve them in some trouble. They all accepted his request and promised to not tell anyone about them. After the meeting was over, Yasaka took her leave and went to do some faction-related work, and Kunou took the other 3 and gave them a tour around the faction headquarters. They were surprised to see so many types yokai, and even Tatsuya's stoic face turned into that of pleasure while he rubbed the tails or ears of some yokai who agreed to his request. Seeing him like that, and she too turned into her yokai form so that Tatsuya would pet her too. Seeing her act spoiled, Tatsuya chuckled but still did as she wanted, and when he started rubbing, both of them had a blissful expression on their face. Seeing them both, Miyuki and Kurumi felt envious, as both of them couldn't grow tails and ears like that of yokai, as Miyuki was just a human and Kurumi could only chain between a human or a tailed beast but not a yokai. This made her irritated, as she too was a 9-tailed fox, but their conditions were very different. From that day onwards, Tatsuya and the others know that even he could not maintain his calm in front of animal-eared cute girls. After the tour, Tatsuya and the others went with Kunou to their living quarters. They decided to take a bath and Tatsuya was excited about it as it was an onsen and he really liked to take a dip in onsen. He entered the bath, cleaned his body and then went in the onsen and started to relax, but soon he heard the door of the bath opened. He turned around and saw Yasaka and the others there. Seeing them, Tatsuya got flustered and started to take his leave, only to be stopped by Kurumi and Yasaka, who grabbed his hands and put them in between their breasts and pulled him in the bath along with the. Tatsuya looked at both of them and they looked back at him with a smile on their face. Yasaka hugged his arm tighter and said, "You have just entered the bath, you should stay here a bit longer. We don't mind you being here." Tatsuya looked at everyone present there and sighed in defeat. No one there was bothered by his presence, so he too decided to not think too much about it. He closed his eyes, took a comfortable position, and then started to relax. Seeing that he was not in the least bothered by their presence, Yasaka got a bit annoyed. The others didn't had any problems with it as Miyuki and Kurumi are used to taking baths with him and Kunou just like a child that she was didn't knew anything. But then Yasaka got an idea and she went out of water and sat on a nearby stool and transformed into her yokai form and said, "Tatsuya, would you help me in washing my tails?" Tatsuya, who heard her, immediately opened his eyes and looked at her. He saw 9 beautiful golden tails swinging to and fro, attracting him more and more. Seeing Yasaka using Tatsuya's weakness, Kurumi and Miyuki couldn't help but look at her with jealousy. Yasaka had heard from her subordinates about how Tatsuya was interested in yokai's fluffy ears and tails. For the first time in her life, she was very glad that she took good care of her fur. Tatsuya, who approached Yasaka, caressed her tails and thought that they were very soft. He started rubbing his cheeks slowly with her tails, enjoying the pleasant sensation that they caused. Yasaka, whose tails were caressed by Tatsuya, was blushing and was also feeling very hot because her tails were also very sensitive spot for her, and every time Tatsuya caressed her tail she would experience a jolt pass through her body, and finally unable to bear the sensation she turned around and gave a deep kiss to him and then yuried his face in his breasts. Every time Tatsuya tried to speak something she felt vibrations flow through her breast which made her more excited. Seeing what they were doing, Miyuki immediately covered Kunou's eyes. Kurumi was enjoying the show in front of her but decided to step in or it would take a wrong turn. Kurumi approached both of them and pulled Yasaka away from him. Yasaka tried to get free from Kurumi's grasp but was unable to. Finally realization hit her and she got bright red because of embarrassment. She immediately started running towards the door and left the hot spring as soon as possible, though to Tatsuya it seemed very cute to him. During the dinner, Tatsuya sat beside Yasaka, who was still feeling embarrassed. Tatsuya looked at her and sighed. He kept his hand on hers and said, "You should not feel embarrassed about it. I am not mad at you, rather I am very happy that a beautiful woman such as you accepted me." He gave a gentle smile to her before saying, "So thank you. But still know that I am still a minor, so you have to wait a few more years before we can have fun." He winked at her at the end of his sentence. Yasaka was taken aback by the wink, and her blush grew to a darker shade of red, and she looked away. After that they continued to eat without talking to anyone. At night everyone was sleeping peacefully except Tatsuya, who was covered by 4 girls sleeping in very odd positions. The next morning Tatsuya woke up and looked at all of them with a blaming gaze, as she was also one of those people who didn't let him sleep peacefully. Tatsuya and the others were standing at the train station. Kunou was clinging to him like koala and was giving him puppy eyes to stay there with her, but Tatsuya stood her resolve and said, "I have to go back for now, Kunou, but it is not like that we cannot meet in future. I will come and visit you from time to time, and you could also come at my place to spend your time there." He gave them a smile, and then a small bracelet and a ring appeared in his hands. He gave the ring to Yasaka and the bracelet to Kunou. Both of them were just like the ring he gave to Miyuki, and he explained them how to use it. Both of them were very happy that Tatsuya cared for them and would come to their aid whenever they would be in trouble. Yasaka asked Tatsuya to put the ring on her hand and Kunou did the same. Suddenly Yasaka grabbed Tatsuya's shoulder and bit his neck. She gave him a mark in his neck and then licked it seductively and said, "Now I have marked you as my mate. You have to take responsibility." Yasaka looked at the other 3 with a triumphant look which said, "I am ahead of you now." They were about to lash out at each other, but then the train arrived. Tatsuya sighed in relief and thought, "Thank God they didn't start fighting here. Who knows what all could they have caused." The girls bid farewell to them and entered the train, leaving Tatsuya and the mother and daughter behind. Kunou was very sad on seeing him leave. She also wanted to mark him as his mate, but she was still too young and was not allowed to mark others as mates. Tatsuya saw this, came closer to her and did the legendary Itachi Uchiha forehead poke, and said, "Maybe next time," and entered the train. Kunou was holding her forehead with a smile on her face, and seeing her daughter's happy expression, Yasaka couldn't help but smile as well. Chapter 20. Restaurant and the Cosplayers. After returning back from Kyoto, Tatsuya and the other had once again started their training, and Tatsuya had also started to pace up and open his restaurant. He still had some funds left, but he didn't want to take any risks. Tatsuya had also started to increase Miyuki's training once again, as he didn't want to see her to be in the same situation which Yasaka and Kunou just encountered. It was true that he would save her as well, but what he would do if she could not contact him, or he could not reach her during an emergency. Miyuki was struggling to keep up with his training, but after learning about his reason to train her this much from Kurumi, she didn't give up and tried her best to keep up with him. Tatsuya had also promised her that he would make her a special weapon if she could land a hit on him during the spars. Tatsuya also went on dates with both Miyuki and Kurumi from time to time as a reward for them to keep up with his training, so they didn't complain a bit as they thought that the reward was worth the hard work they did. Miyuki was also able to land a hit on Tatsuya after a month of training, and just like Tatsuya promised, he gave her a bluish-green sword which looked to be made of ice, basically Yu-Gi-Oh's sword from Sairaorg but slightly greenish color. The sword was able to manipulate ice and wind without any problem, and it could also change its size. The sword's powers also grew along with her. Seeing Miyuki's progress, Tatsuya was very satisfied. She had already reached the high class level, and with her new sword she could also take on some of the low ultimate class beings. Tatsuya also taught Miyuki how to fly with the help of ki. Though she had troubles in learning ki manipulation but was finally able to get it, though her ki attacks are not very powerful, so she only uses it for flight. After months of hard work, he was finally able to open his restaurant. He had decided that he would be the cook, and he would ask Kurumi to be her waitress. During the first week of restaurant there were not many customers, so it was easily manageable for them, but after tasting his food more and more people started coming there, and the workload on them increased. Kurumi didn't had any problem, as she just needed to serve the food and take the orders and had the stamina as a tailed beast to do so, but for Tatsuya it was a different story. He was rushed with orders to the point he used shadow clones for helping him cook, and buying the ingredients which were depleted at a very fast rate. Seeing his progress, many nearby restaurants tried to cause ruckus in his restaurant, but Tatsuya, who heard their ulterior motives, used his powers, changed their memories a bit such that they would just sit and enjoy the food and would leave them a lot of tip. Tatsuya and the other two also noticed that many supernatural beings would come to dine at his place as well, but most of them were either low class or mid class, so they were no threat to them. Tatsuya even invited Kunou and Yasaka to his restaurant, and they both were surprised to see the rush in the restaurant, but once they tasted his food they realized the reason for the rush. Tatsuya had also started writing novels and drawing manga which were famous in his previous world. He had started publishing Harry Potter for the novel and One Piece for the manga. When he went to the publishing company, the people there just felt that the child was just playing around, but after reading his work those same people were on their knees in front of him requesting him to publish his work there. Tatsuya, who got aware of the situation, started leeching out as much as he could. The higher-ups of the company were happy that he decided to publish his work there, but still the contract that they made with him was too much for a new writer, and they felt that they had been cheated. But once his work was published, the hype that it created made those people forget about that, and were now happy that they accepted his offer. He kept his identity a secret as he didn't want any more trouble than he was already experiencing, and used the pen name Saitama. He used this name because he thought that people at the publishing office calling him Saitama-sensei, like Genos, would be funny. Right now Tatsuya came out of his house, and is now going to his restaurant beside his house. Tatsuya had already employed some of his clones there before he went to his house for some rest, and now he was going back to work. Tatsuya looked towards his restaurant, and saw that it was crowded just like always. Suddenly Tatsuya noticed two people outside his restaurant. One was wearing a magical girl outfit, and the other was wearing a maid outfit. To a normal person they would look like some cosplayers, but on seeing them Tatsuya frowned a bit. The people were none other than Sairaorg Leviathan, a devil king, and Graphia Lucifage, the strongest queen. At first Tatsuya thought that they came to investigate about him and the others, but sighed when read their minds with telepathy. They were not here for investigation. It looked like Sairaorg and Graphia met at a comiket that they came to visit. Sairaorg came by herself to find some material on magical girls, and Graphia came to accompany Rias, and after meeting each other they both decided to catch up with each other. Rias did not join them and left back for Underworld. Tatsuya thought for a while and then decided to talk with them. He was also interested to meet with both of them as he had seen them in the anime before. He also wanted to take a picture along with Sairaorg as he had also seen the magical girl anime along with Miyuki, who was also a fan, and he too thought that it was quite good. He was not flustered anymore as now he knew that they were not here to investigate on him, and even if the things were to go south, he could easily vaporize them without much difficulty. He approached them and saw both of them talking to each other while standing in a line to enter his restaurant. He grabbed Sairaorg's dress with his fingers and lightly tugged it. When Sairaorg noticed that someone was tugging her dress, she turned around to see who was calling her. When she turned around and saw a cute young boy standing behind her, Graphia also followed her gaze to see who was calling her. Tatsuya, who saw Sairaorg's face from a close distance, thought that she was very beautiful but still remained calm. He gave her a gentle smile and asked, "Are you doing a magical girl Milky cosplay?" Sairaorg, when heard the boy's question, became excited and said, "Yes, I am the magical girl Levitan," and did the pose that she did in anime. Tatsuya thought that she looked cute but still remained calm and said, "I am a fan too, can I have a picture with you?" Sairaorg heard him and started fiercely nodding her head and said, "Yes, you can." Seeing her nod like that, Tatsuya started to laugh lightly, but seeing him laugh, all the girls, including Sairaorg and Graphia, that were looking at the interaction between him and Sairaorg only had one thought, "Cuut." Sairaorg immediately hugged him and started rubbing his cheeks with hers and said, "So cute." Tatsuya didn't mind her as he too felt nice and let her do what wanted. Sairaorg calmed herself down and looked towards Graphia, who had also calmed herself after seeing his cuteness, and said, "Fia-chan, will you take our picture?" Seeing Graphia nod in agreement, Tatsuya gave his phone to her and said, "Thank you." Graphia nodded and took the picture of both of them and gave the phone back to him. Tatsuya took the phone and said, "Thank you, my name is Tatsuya Shiba, nice to meet you." Sairaorg and Graphia nodded and then Sairaorg said, "Nice to meet you as well, Tatsuya-chan. My name is Sairaorg Leviathan, but you can call me Sarah-chan or Levitan, and the one beside me is Dash." Graphia bowed and said, "Nice to meet you, my name is Graphia Lucifage." She bowed again, and this time Tatsuya also bowed. He then looked at her curiously and asked, "Why are you wearing a maid uniform? Are you also cosplaying?" Hearing this, Sairaorg started to laugh and said, "I told you to wear something else." Graphia ignored her and said, "No, this is my work attire." Tatsuya didn't ask her further about the maid clothes as he thought that she liked that, as she even wore it in public places as well. They all started to talk to each other while waiting in the line. Mostly it was Tatsuya and Sairaorg discussing about the anime. Graphia was actually not very bothered by that. She even felt a bit grateful as she didn't had to face the hyperactive girl who came along with her. When their turn came, Sairaorg looked at Tatsuya and said, "Tatsuya-chan, come and eat with us, it would be more fun. You don't mind, Graphia, do you?" Sairaorg looked at Graphia for confirmation, to which she gave a nod of approval. She had a good impression of Tatsuya and thought that he was better behaved than a certain red-headed otaku girl. Seeing Graphia approving her request, Sairaorg was very happy. She thought that Tatsuya was very cut just like Sona and also didn't acted cold towards her, and he also showed interest in magical girls. She was very happy to finally meet someone with whom she could freely talk about her hobby. She was about to ask Tatsuya again, but when she looked back, Tatsuya was gone. They both searched for him but couldn't find him. Sairaorg was very sad, but Graphia comforted her and said that he might have gone back to his friends or parents. Sairaorg could only sigh, and then both of them ordered their food. While they were talking to each other, someone put the dishes they ordered on the table. Both of them were mesmerized by the aroma that came out of the dish but came back from their thoughts when they heard a familiar voice. "I hope you enjoy the food. I worked extra hard preparing it for you, and I also added a dessert." They both looked towards the source of the voice and saw Tatsuya standing there in chef's attire and smiling at them. He bowed to them and then left them. He also used to serve food to the customers while Kurumi was on break, and he was also well known among the regulars. Sairaorg came out of her shock and said, "Wait, Tatsuya-chan, you work in this restaurant?" Tatsuya looked back at them and just smiled and then went back to the kitchen. Chapter 21. Shiro Nico. From that day onwards, both Sairaorg and Graphia often came to his restaurant. At first they were surprised that the restaurant belonged to him, but later shrugged it off as his food was too good. They had also met Miyuki and Kurumi during one of their visits, and Miyuki was very wary of them at first and thought that they had come to take Tatsuya away from them, but after Tatsuya explained the situation she started to loosen up around them. Both Sairaorg and Miyuki got along very well as both of them liked to talk about magical girls, and Sairaorg treated her just like Sona. Sairaorg even ranted her problem that how cold her sister was to her and how she didn't like magical girls. Both of them had to calm her down by letting her hugging them till she fell asleep. At one time Graphia and Sairaorg brought Milikas along with them. Tatsuya, who saw him, was neither the less happy meeting him and treated him like his little brother. Milikas too had a lot of fun with them and started treating Tatsuya as his older brother. Tatsuya also got some information from the strongest queen. One day Sairaorg forced Graphia to drink along with her, and Graphia, though being reluctant, still drank some alcohol and immediately became light-headed. She started spouting random things, and because of that Tatsuya had to take her to the guest room along with Sairaorg, who was already passed out. The information that Tatsuya got was that in this world Graphia was not Surzex's wife and was only his queen, and that Surzex married some other member of her clan who died after giving birth to Milikas. Once both of them woke up, Tatsuya started scolding both of them was the actions that they caused in his restaurant and how much it disturbed the customers. During the whole time Tatsuya was scolding them, they were in Seiza position with their heads down. Sairaorg also got a head chop when she tried to refute Tatsuya. She even tried to ask Miyuki to take her side and fight against him, to which Miyuki easily ignored and took Tatsuya's side. Sairaorg got shocked that how easily Miyuki left her alone and ran out of the room while saying things like both of them were being mean. Graphia once again apologized for the problems that she caused and left. The rest of the things were going on peacefully. Miyuki was steadily getting stronger and stronger, and Tatsuya was very satisfied with her progress. Tatsuya's restaurant has also gotten very famous, and he was planning on opening a branch in Kyoto with Yasaka's help. Right now Tatsuya was going home after buying some groceries for his home and the ingredients for his restaurant. While he was crossing a bridge his eyes shifted a bit and he stopped for a bit to watch the sunset. He leaned against the railings of the bridge and watched the sunset. While he was watching, he noticed something from the corner of his eyes. He looked towards the river and saw something floating in the river. He looked more closely and saw an injured white cat lying unconscious on a plank of wood. Tatsuya first looked around to check if someone was there or not. Feeling that no one was around, Tatsuya jumped in the river, but rather than swimming he walked on the water using chakra. He went towards the cat and picked it up, and as soon as he picked the cat, he felt a faint presence of magic in the cat. The cat might be someone's familiar or a Nikamata, though the cat had hidden its presence quite well, but for someone as strong as Tatsuya could easily tell that it was not a normal cat. Tatsuya went back and placed the cat inside his hoodie and started to use pyrokinesis on it so that the cat do not catch cold. After reaching his home, he directly went towards his room, not disturbing Miyuki and Kurumi, who were watching TV. He went towards a cupboard and took out a first aid box from it and started treating the cat, though he still used some magic to heal her and enhance her recovery as well. He didn't use it too much as it would have caused the cat to be suspicious of him. After completing the treatment, he placed her on a cushion and covered her with a small blanket and started stroking her ears. After touching her ears, Tatsuya was unable to hold himself back, and just like he did in Kyoto, he gave in to his pleasure and started stroking her ears, though not very fiercely as he may frighten the cat. After some time, while he was playing with her, the cat woke up and gave a yawn. Seeing that she had woken up, Tatsuya wanted to stop himself but was not able to. The cat felt comforted and started purring, but soon she realized that she was in an unknown location and immediately jumped back. As soon as she landed on the ground, a jolt of pain emerged in her body and gave a painful meow. Seeing her jump back, Tatsuya wanted to stop her, but he was too late, and when he heard her painful meow, Tatsuya sighed. He picked the cat up and started to stroke her gently, while infusing some magic to ease her pain. After a while he said, "You should be careful, your wounds have still not healed yet. I will not harm you, so you should not be afraid of me." The cat was still wary of the human, but didn't do anything as his caressing was making her feel better. Once Tatsuya thought that she was fine, he brought her near his face. They both looked at each other for a while. Tatsuya noticed that the cat had bright pink eyes. He stared for a bit and then started rubbing his cheeks with hers and was enjoying the blissful softness of her fur. The cat was dumbfounded by Tatsuya. To her he looked expressionless and cold, but here he was affectionately rubbing his face with hers. Though the cat was annoyed by this, she let it be as he was the one who saved her. Tatsuya stopped doing that and looked again at her and asked, "Do you want to eat something?" Hearing his question, the cat nodded her head unconsciously, but then she suddenly realized what she had done. She started meowing. Tatsuya, who saw her nod her head, thought, though she is trying to lay low, she doesn't know how to act like a cat very well, and nodded her head, which is not like a cat. She is definitely a yokai. Tatsuya didn't said anything, put her back in his hoodie such that her head was popping out, and then went to the kitchen and started making food. Once the food was prepared, the aroma coming out of it made the cat's mouth flooding with saliva. Tatsuya chuckled on seeing this and served the food in 2 dishes and went to eat along with her. Chapter 22. Author's Note. Just telling you all that the cat is not Kaneko. She is from a different anime. Any guesses who might she be? Chapter 23. My cat. A week had passed since Tatsuya had brought the Nikamata. Her injuries were healed by the 3rd day, but she still lived along with him and the others. Miyuki and Kurumi had also met her but were unable to tell that she was a yokai as she had hid her energy very well. The cat enjoyed living there as the food was very good and she was treated just like a family, though she struggled a bit when Tatsuya secretly caresses all over her body and would run his cheeks with her. She felt that her body was ravaged by him but forgave him as she liked that as well, and also the food which he made was also very good. Tatsuya also noticed that the cat would go out alone every night after checking that everyone was asleep. To keep a record of her, Tatsuya had marked her with his magic so that he could tell where she was, and it would also inform him if she was in danger. Through this magic, Tatsuya knew that she would move away from them so that they would be safe. Tatsuya had noticed that during the night, whenever Tatsuya felt presence of some devils, she would go out and the devils were found dead there. It was like the devils were following her. Tatsuya wanted to know the reason because of which the devils were following her, but he remained silent and thought that she would tell him when the time comes. He didn't thought that she was evil because if she was evil, Kurumi would have felt her negative emotions. Tatsuya would also take the cat with her whenever he would go out inside his hoodie with her head popping out. The cat at first was confused by all this at first but started enjoying this type of outing and also started to jump in his hoodie on her own. Right now Tatsuya is lying on his bed trying to sleep, but suddenly the magic that he had placed on the cat started giving an SOS signal. Tatsuya immediately checked her location and found her surrounded by a lot of devils. Tatsuya immediately changed to his combat gear with his magic and teleported to her location. As soon as he teleported there, he turned invisible and hid his presence. He then looked towards the direction of the devils and saw a lot of them. There were 3 low class, 3 middle class, 2 high class and even 1 ultimate class devils there. He also saw a girl wearing a navy blue colored kimono and fighting the devils with a katana. All the devils except the high class and ultimate class were fighting her while the others were standing behind them and watching their subordinates fight. The girl was easily able to deal with the devils and was also able to inflict damage on them. She slashed her sword forward with the intent to kill, but was suddenly hit by a fireball. "Give up already, and this will be less trouble for the both of us. You cannot defeat us all anyway," said one of the high-class devils. "Yeah, why are you struggling so much? You were never wanted by anyone, so when some people are showing interest in you, why are you resisting? You might at least do something good for us, you unwanted shit." The girl got up with the help of her katana and then started radiating her aura, and 2 white cat ears and a tail came out. She pointed her katana at the one who fired the magic at her and vanished from her place. Suddenly a clang sound was heard. The girl's katana was now covered in blood, and the devil's head fell down. The low-class and the middle-class devils were terrified and were unable to move. Seeing this, the girl again vanished from her place. At the next moment, all the devils' heads except the remaining high-class and ultimate class fell down. The high-class devil frowned and started firing his magic randomly in her direction. The girl was dodging or slicing through the magic, but suddenly she felt something coming at her from the side, and then she was suddenly thrown towards the wall. When the smoke cleared, the ultimate class devil appeared. The devil looked towards the girl and said, "If you do not come willingly, we can bring you with us after killing you and then turning you into a devil. It is for your own good that you follow our orders." The girl, though she was in pain, stood up and said in a weak voice, "I will not go with you." Both the devils snorted and the high-class devil raised his voice in frustration and said, "Who do you think you are, you bitch? Just because we are giving you little priority you think you can do anything? Boss, I say we just kill her and then take her back as a devil." The girl who heard this started to release an ominous dark aura and her black hair started turning white. Seeing her power increasing, even the ultimate class devil panicked a little. The girl whose hair had fully turned white looked at the devils with a glare and said, I cannot die and I will not go with you. Finally, after all this time I received some affection and caring, and you want me to throw it all away. She said that and launched towards the devils. She started slashing her katana at the both of them, inflicting some deep wounds to them. The ultimate class devil was able to hold himself, but it was another matter for the high-class devil. He was not even able to see her movement, much less dodge her attacks. He gritted his teeth and again started firing his magic in random direction. Just as he gave a sigh of relief and thought that he got her, he heard, behind you, and then his chest was pierced by the girl. She took out her katana from his body and then looked towards the ultimate class devil but was not able to see him. Thinking that he might have ran away, she started growling in anger, but suddenly she was hit in the stomach by something and flew back. The devil appeared in the place she was standing before, and then started laughing maniacally. The girl, when got her balance, looked towards him, but the devil disappeared once again, but this time she was vigilant. She started looking around, but suddenly she felt a something aimed at her temple and immediately ducked to dodged. The devil appeared in front of her and she slashed her katana in his direction. The devil jumped back and again disappeared. The girl was starting to get irritated and started cursing him. The devil took advantage of her enraged state and started attacking her. The girl, unable to stop the attack, was being hit by him repeatedly. The devil kicked her in the stomach and she crashed back on a wall. The girl was about to pick her katana, but then the devil appeared in front of her and broke her katana with his feet. The girl was about to attack him with her claws, but she fell down on her knees and coughed blood. Seeing her condition, the devil said, Looks like that power boost takes a huge toll on your body. Well, none of my problem now. I will just kill you and then take you with me. The devil charged a magic blast and was about to fire at her, but suddenly both of them heard a voice. Oi, stop. Will ya? Both the girl and the devil were shocked seeing the source of the voice. The girl was more shocked though as she recognized him. Chapter 1. Wishes. In the place where everything is covered in darkness, there is a small ball of light floating around there. I don't know for how long has it been since I am here. I do know that I was a high school student and all the things, mostly anime and manga, that I have witnessed. I remember all that very well. Just the last few minutes before coming to this dark place are all blur, thought the ball of light. A few more weeks or so later, the ball of light, or more accurately, the soul of the boy, was getting rather impatient or frustrated from all that waiting because he had started to get bored there. During all the time he had reviewed all the anime and manga he had ever watched or read through his memories, and now he had nothing left to do. Just a few minutes after he had started thinking what to do, something like a portal of light appeared in front of him. Out of the portal a humanoid figure wearing a black coat and pants came out of it, but his face just appeared as a blur to him. The humanoid figure first looked around and then looked towards the soul and said, Sorry for the delay, I was rather busy in my work that I forgot about you, he said in a very casual tone. Hearing him, the soul of the man got irritated but controlled himself and asked, Okay, first, who are you and what place is this and what am I doing here? Hearing his question, the humanoid figure looked towards him and said, Who, rather a calm one, For the answer to your questions, I am a high-level being who is supposed to manage the rebirth cycle of this dimension, and this place in your terms you can call it as void, and why you are here should now be obvious to you as you are dead. The soul took some time to digest the information and then sighed and asked, So what will happen to me now? Hearing his response, the humanoid figure chuckled and said, Not sad or confused after hearing about your death. The soul calmly said, Well, what's done is done, it cannot be reversed, and it's not like that I had any family or friends who would miss me even if I die. Hearing him, the humanoid figure also sighed and said, Normally a soul that dies had to be sent to either heaven or hell depending upon their actions, or being sent back to their world in a new body without their memories to start a new life. The soul was about to ask something, but the humanoid figure stopped him and said, But since I was very late and made you wait in the void for so long, I can give you an opportunity to live a life in a world you like with some wishes, of course. So what do you say? Hearing his offer, the soul became slightly excited and asked, It can be any world, right? Even anime and manga world? Yes, it can be any world, but you cannot travel to another world, only one world, so choose carefully. The soul thought for a while, but suddenly he thought of something and asked, How many wishes do I get? The humanoid figure said, You will get 5 wishes, out of which one will be about changing your appearance, and one would be any one person's powers with some optimization. The soul began thinking again, and after an hour or so said, For the world I would like to go to the world of high school DXD. Okay, it's done. Now tell me about your wishes. Okay, for the wishes I would like to have 1. Super growth. 2. Skill creation. 3. Immortality. 4. Powers of Seiki Kusuwa from the anime, The Disastrous Life of Seiki Kusu. 5. Appearance of Tatsuya Shiba from the anime, The Irregular at Magic High School. The humanoid figure thought for a while and said, "Okay, that's possible, but the immortality thing will be like you would be live like other supernatural beings. That means you could be killed, and in return you could make the lifespan of your trusted normal humans just like yourself by giving them your blood, but it would not work if either one of you does not acknowledge each other or rather trust each other, and know your blood cannot be used to save life in dire situations or for treating injuries." The soul was silent for a while, digesting the information given to him, and then with a sigh he said, "Okay, and also can you make me an orphan, as I don't want my parents to get involved in the supernatural world, and make me of the same age of Issei Huidu. Okay, all of the things are done, and as a bonus I would give you a house in Kuoh and money able to last for about 10 years or so. You will reincarnate as 4-year-old, and also don't tell anything about me or your past life to anyone, even those who you trust, and I have put a seal on your brain so that no one would be able to read your brain, and of course the people would not be able to notice the seal. Now bye. Bye, and thanks a lot for this chance." As soon as he said that, he was sucked into a portal, and the soul lost his consciousness. Himari was shocked on hearing him. Tatsuya stood up and moved his hand towards Himari and asked, "I will ask you again, are you willing to join us in our family, Himari Noihara?" Himari took his hand and said, "I am. I want to live with you." Himari then started crying as she was feeling happy that she now has a family. Tatsuya looked at her crying and gave a tired sigh. He went towards her and hugged her and started to pat her back slowly. Himari shoved her head in his chest to hide her crying and blushing face from him. Once she stopped crying, she looked at Tatsuya and asked, "So you knew about me being a Nikamada all this time, right?" Tatsuya nodded. Himari, who saw him nod her head, said, "And then too you ravaged my body daily. Don't you have any shame? How are you going to make me feel that I had not been ravaged? Tell me." Tatsuya, who heard her, sighed and asked, "Okay, I will do any one thing that you want to ask for forgiveness. Is that all right?" Hearing his words, Himari smiled mischievously and said, "Simple, you have to take responsibility for it." Tatsuya was about to retort, but suddenly Himari came near his face and liked his cheek and nibbled his ear. Seeing that there was no way out of it, Tatsuya sighed and stopped thinking about it, and rather started thinking on how to make the others accept Himari. He knew he would hear an earful from Miyuki about all this matter. Chapter 25. Not My Mate. After Tatsuya was done clearing the scene, he and Himari went back to his home. After entering inside, they noticed that Miyuki and Kurumi were there in the living room. Both of them turned around and found Tatsuya along with a girl. Both of them narrowed their eyes and looked at Tatsuya and Himari. Though they were not saying anything, the way they were glaring looked like they were saying, "Tell us what happened now." Tatsuya sighed and said, "Calm down, I will explain." Tatsuya went to the living room and Himari followed behind him. Tatsuya sat on the sofa and Miyuki and Kurumi sat beside him. Seeing both of them showing of their relationship with Tatsuya, Himari's brow was twitching and decided to pay them back later. Tatsuya, who heard her thoughts through telepathy, had a sweat drop. He looked at his side and saw both Miyuki and Kurumi looking intently on Himari. Himari didn't wavered by their gaze and looked back at them. Tatsuya, who had started to get nervous from the atmosphere around him, said, "Okay, you two cut it out. Himari, meet them, they are Miyuki and Kurumi, they are my..." He looked at them and said, "My lovers." Both of them nodded and smiled at his answer. Tatsuya gave a sigh of relief as thought that he just dodged a bullet, but suddenly he felt killing intent aimed at him. He nervously looked up and saw Himari smiling at him, but to Tatsuya the smile wasn't sweet at all. It was the smile of a demon. Tatsuya coughed and said, "And you too meet Himari. She is the cat which lived with us for a few days." Both of them blinked their eyes and said, "What, together?" Tatsuya was about to answer them, but Himari interrupted him and said, "Yes, he is telling the truth," and changed into a cat and then reversed back. Both the girls were astonished but were not shocked, as they have seen many things like that. Miyuki then looked back at Tatsuya and asked, "Okay, what is she doing here?" This time too Himari answered them and said, "I will be living with you all from now, please take care of me in future." Miyuki looked at her with narrowed eyes and said, "And why would you be living with us?" Hearing her question, Himari smiled mischievously and said, "Since Tatsuya ravaged my body, so he will be taking responsibility for that, and I will be his mate too," she said, focusing on the mate part. After Himari finished saying, the room started to get colder. Ice had started to form around Miyuki. Miyuki turned and looked at Tatsuya and asked in a cold voice, "Oni-sama, what is she talking about? She is saying something about ravaging her body or something, and what is the mate business here?" Tatsuya looked at her with an expressionless face and said, "Do you really believe that I would do something like that, Miyuki? Am I that low in your view?" Miyuki, who heard him, stopped glaring at him, and ice started to melt. Miyuki started to feel worried and said, No, it's not like that. I know Oni-sama is not like that. I am sorry for doubting you." After she said that, she looked down feeling ashamed. Tatsuya, who saw that, enveloped her in a hug. After a while, Kurumi looked at Tatsuya and asked, "So why is she really here?" Hearing her question, Miyuki too looked up at Tatsuya, expecting an answer. Tatsuya and Himari then started to explain the situation to both of them, and after the explanation was over, Miyuki and Kurumi looked at Himari and said, "Well, I do sympathize with your situation and have no problems with you living with us." Himari smiled softly at them, hearing that they have no problems with her living there. "But there is one question that you have still not answered. Why did you say that you were Oni-sama's mate?" Himari was about to answer them but was stopped by Kurumi, who said, "Stop. Tatsuya, you tell us." Tatsuya nodded and told them the reason. After hearing the reason, both Miyuki looked at Himari and said, "You become her mate because he played with you in your cat form." Himari nodded her head in response. They then turned towards Tatsuya and asked, "And you accepted it?" To which Tatsuya said, "No." Hearing him, all three of them blanked. After some time, Himari came out of shock and jumped on him, grabbed his collar and started shaking him and said, "Hey, didn't you said that you would take responsibility? So what are you doing by denying about me being your mate?" She continued to shake him after saying that. Tatsuya looked at her with an expressionless face and said, "Yes, I did say that I would take responsibility for what I did, and will fulfill it by taking care of you like a good cat with whom I played a lot." Tatsuya gave her a sweet smile. Tatsuya was very happy to get back at her because had been spouting nonsense about her body being ravaged by him and was annoyed by that, so he decided to take his revenge. After hearing his answer, Miyuki and Kurumi were lying on the ground and were launching very loudly. Seeing them laugh, Himari started gritting her teeth. She was thinking of her as fool that she got played by Tatsuya's tricks and wanted to lash out him, but suddenly she felt something on her head. She looked up and saw Tatsuya patting her head with a smile on her face. Tatsuya looked at Himari and said, "Though it is a bit late, I now officially invite you in our family." The other girls also stopped laughing and stood up. They placed their hands on Himari's shoulders and said, "Welcome to the family." She looked at both of them and then smiled and said, "Thank you all of you, and take care of me from now on." The others smiled at her and nodded. Himari then looked at Miyuki and Kurumi and said, "Though I am still not his mate, bear in mind that it would not be late before he falls for me, so best of luck." She then looked at them with a competitive glare. Miyuki and Kurumi also returned her glare and said, "We will see about that, Nico-san." They kept on glaring at each other until they received a hit on their heads from Tatsuya, who looked at them with an expressionless face, but they could tell that he was annoyed. He looked at them and said in a cold voice, "It's getting late, so go back to bed now. And Himari, you would be sleeping with them, understood?" Himari was about to whine, but when she heard her cold tone, she stood straight and nodded her head furiously like the other two. Tatsuya looked at them once more and nodded before going back to his room. Chapter 26. I Hate You. The next morning, Tatsuya woke up early like he is used to and went for his morning workout, but surprising for him, Miyuki was not accompanying him. Tatsuya thought for a while if something was wrong and used his magic to find where she was. Getting her presents from her room, he thought, "They must be talking till late in the night." He shrugged his thoughts and went out. After completing his workout, he came back completely drenched in sweat. He opened the door and went inside. While walking towards the kitchen, he smelled something good. When he entered the kitchen, he found Himari cooking something for the breakfast. When Himari noticed someone coming inside the kitchen, she turned around to look who was there. When she found that Tatsuya came, she gave him a smile and said, "Breakfast will be done in a while. You should go and take a shower and get refreshed." Tatsuya also smiled back at her and nodded before going to bathroom. After taking a shower, Tatsuya came out and saw that Himari was setting the table. He then went towards her and decided to help her and said that she should go and wake the others up. Complying to his request, Himari went to wake the others up and Tatsuya set the table. All of them sat around the table and started to eat their food. Tatsuya took a bite of his food and then looked towards Himari and said, "It's delicious, Himari. It's been a long time since someone made something for me, so I really appreciate it." He gave a small and gentle smile which made Himari blushed. Looking at both of them, Miyuki and Kurumi gave a glare of jealousy to Himari. Himari looked at them for a while and then smirked. Seeing his smirk, both of them had nerves popping on their foreheads. Tatsuya ignored the three of them and continued eating his breakfast. After finishing the meal, Tatsuya gave some money to the girls and asked them to accompany Himari in buying some clothes and necessities that she might require. He could not accompany them as he had some work in his restaurant. After working for a while in the kitchen, Tatsuya went out to take a break, and just as he stepped out of the gate he bumped into someone and fell back. He immediately got up and said, "I am sorry for bumping into you, it was not intentional." He moved his hand forward for the person to get up. The person he bumped into was a girl with short black hair. The girl took his hand and said, "No, it's not your fault. I was not looking ahead while running. I hope you can forgive me." She bowed her head towards Tatsuya. Seeing her actions, Tatsuya lightly chuckled and said, "You don't have to apologize, I am fine. By the way, I am Tatsuya Shiba, nice to meet you." The girl nodded and said, "Nice to meet you as well, I am Sona Citri, and I apologize again for bumping into you." Just as Tatsuya was about to speak, a pink blur appeared in front of him and Sona vanished from her spot. "Sotan found you," said a voice. "Wani-sama, control yourself," said another voice. Tatsuya looked at the source of the voice and saw Sairaorg hugging Sona tightly. Sairaorg kept hugging Sona tightly but saw Tatsuya standing near them and got excited and enveloped him in a hug as well and said, "Tatsuya-chan, what are you doing here? Did you miss me?" Tatsuya, who was still in her embrace, said, "I am here because you are literally standing in front of my restaurant, and I missed you, Sarah." Sairaorg, who heard him, became embarrassed and then smiled on hearing that he missed her. "I missed you as well, and this time I brought my sister as well," said Sairaorg excitedly. "I am happy meeting you and all but dash," said Tatsuya with a happy face, but it soon turned neutral, and both him and Sona said at the same time, "Can you please put us down?" Hearing them, Sairaorg was a bit disappointed, but still put both of them down. When they got out of her embrace, Sona bowed towards Tatsuya and said, "I am sorry for my sister's actions, she is a bit childish." Tatsuya waved his hands and said, "No need, I know how excited can she be." Sona looked up and then looked at him and asked, "How do you know Wani-sama?" "Oh, she is just a regular customer and we are good friends, that's all." Tatsuya then looked at her intently and said, "So you are the infamous Sotan who don't like magical girls and is cold to Sarah, huh?" Hearing Tatsuya talking about her, Sona got embarrassed and looked towards Sairaorg with hatred. When Sairaorg noticed her gaze, she looked away from her and then asked Tatsuya, "So what are you doing, Tatsuya-chan?" Tatsuya looked at her with an expressionless face and said, "Don't try change the topic. Anyways, I am just taking a break from my work in the kitchen, what about you?" Sairaorg pouted cutely and then smiled and said, "I just came to treat Sotan lunch and to meet." Tatsuya nodded and said, "Then follow me, the restaurant is already full, you would not be able to eat there." Tatsuya turned around and started walking. Sairaorg didn't think anything and followed Tatsuya happily. Seeing her sister's carefree attitude, Sona sighed at her carelessness but still followed. Tatsuya went to his house and opened the door and went inside. He didn't saw anyone in there and thought that the others were still shopping. Tatsuya sent a telepathic message to them about the current situation. He invited the sisters in his home and made them seated in the living room. He gave them a cup of tea and some refreshments and went to the kitchen to cook. While he was cooking, Sona and Sairaorg were sitting in the living room. Sona turned towards to Sairaorg and asked, "Why are we here, Wani-sama?" Sairaorg smiled and said, "Like I said, I want to treat you an excellent lunch." Sona looked at Sairaorg intently and said, "What's the real reason?" Sairaorg smiled and said, as sharp as ever, "I just wanted you to have more friend, and who knows, if you found him interesting you can ask him to join your peerage." Sona sighed and said, "He is just a normal human, and why do you want me to have more friends?" Sairaorg stopped smiling and turned to her, "Wani-san, mad?" and asked, "How many friends do you have?" Hearing her question, Sona looked away and said, "Oh, what are you saying? I can't hear you." Hearing her sister, Sona got agitated and said, "I said that I have 2 friends." Realizing what she just did, Sona became red from embarrassment and looked away. Seeing her embarrassed, Sairaorg hugged her and started laughing. Tatsuya, who heard them from the kitchen, couldn't help but sigh. After a few moments he went back to the living room and said, "Lunch is ready. Let's go eat before it turns cold. Sairaorg nodded and jumped from the sofa with Sona in her embrace. Tatsuya looked at Sona and said in a mocking tone, "You really do love your sister." Sona, who heard him, got red and looked away while saying, "Shut up." Tatsuya just laughed and led them to the dining room. In the dining room there were 6 plates on the table. Seeing 6 plates, Sona and Sairaorg got confused and asked, "Is there someone joining us?" Tatsuya looked at them and said, "Yeah, my housemates will be joining, I hope you don't mind." Hearing him, Sairaorg smiled and said, "It's all right, we don't mind, where are they?" Just when Sairaorg asked him, the doorbell rung. Tatsuya smiled and said, "There." Hearing his answer, they all laughed and Tatsuya went to open the door. Tatsuya came back with the others and introduced them to each other. While eating they talked a lot and Miyuki got along well with Sairaorg because they both like magical girls. Seeing Miyuki getting along with Sairaorg, Sona felt a little bitter as she also wanted to be frank with her sister but was unable to do so. Seeing her like that, Tatsuya came near her and said in a slow voice, "Feeling jealous, eh?" Hearing his voice, Sona got startled and looked back at him with a blush and said, "No." Tatsuya had a mischievous smile on his face and said, "List," and started chuckling. Seeing him chuckle, Sona gritted her teeth and lashed out, "No, I am not." They both continued to bicker for a while and the others left them alone and went to watch a movie. Both of them were breathing heavily from all the arguing that they had done. Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Let's leave it at that for now. We will continue it later, I am tired of this." Sona didn't said anything and just nodded. They both went to the living room and saw the others watching a movie. They both sat down and watched the movie for a while, but it didn't interest them. Tatsuya looked at her and asked, "Want to do something else?" Sona looked back at him and said, "Sure, do you have something in mind?" Tatsuya shook his head in denial. Sona thought for a while and said with a grin, "Let's play chess, then I want to see you lose." Tatsuya looked at her and said with a small smile, "We will see who will lose." Tatsuya brought a chess set and they both started playing. In the beginning the match looked in Sona's favor, but Tatsuya turned the tables at the later part of the match. They both were very excited playing with the match and ignored the others who were watching them attentively. After a while both Tatsuya and Sona sighed in disappointment as the match ended in a draw, but they were happy as they enjoyed match. After their match was over, Sairaorg came towards them and said, "Let's go back, Sona, it's very late." Hearing that they were going back, Miyuki became sad. Sona was sad as well but didn't show it on her face. Tatsuya, seeing all this, turned towards Sairaorg and said, "Sarah, why don't you stay here for the night, as it is already very late? Miyuki would be happy as well." Sairaorg looked at Miyuki, who was looking at her with puppy dog eyes. Sairaorg tried to resist but at last got defeated and said, "Fine, fine, we will stay here." "Happy now?" Miyuki smiled and nodded. Tatsuya then made a mischievous face and said, "You will not be disappointed as I have prepared something that you would like a lot." Sairaorg smiled at him but didn't expect too much from Tatsuya. Tatsuya then prepared dinner for everyone and after dinner gave them some pajamas which belonged to Miyuki and Kurumi to them and said, "Let's go, I will show you the guest room." They nodded and followed him. Tatsuya opened the door and switched on the lights. He turned towards them and said, "There is only one bed, so you need to sleep together." Hearing him, Sairaorg's face brightened up and she hugged Tatsuya very tightly. She left him and grabbed Sona, who was trying to leave the room silently. Tatsuya looked at her and gave her a mocking smirk and said, "I hope you liked my hospitality, Sarah." Sairaorg nodded her head vigorously, but Sona gave a death glare to Tatsuya. Tatsuya turned around and before closing the door said, "Enjoy." Sona, who saw him set her up and then leaving, was enraged and shouted, "I hate you, Tatsuya." Chapter 27. 2 years and spar. The next day when Sona woke up and saw Tatsuya, she gave him a death glare. Tatsuya, who saw this, smiled and gave her a thumbs up and said, "It looks like you enjoyed a lot." Hearing this, Sona snapped, grabbed his collar and started shaking him and said, "Like hell I enjoyed, you idiot." Sairaorg, who looked at them, smiled and said, "Looks like you both are getting along well." Hearing this, Sona looked towards Sairaorg and shouted, "No, we are not." Tatsuya then hugged her from the back and placed his head on his shoulder and said, "Don't be like that. We can play chess yesterday, don't you have any fun?" Sona, who heard this, turned her head and looked at him, who was resting his head on her shoulder. Sona sighed and said, "Yes, I did enjoy that and I am sorry for snapping at you. Now lift you head off my shoulder and stay away." Hearing her, Tatsuya smiled back and said, I am glad to know that you enjoyed it. The next time you come here I would let you bath with Sara. Sona got embarrassed and again started lashing out at him. Seeing her sister not being cold, Sairaorg smiled and enclosed both of them in a hug, which made Sona's blush even deeper. From that day on, Sona too came with Sairaorg whenever she visits him. Tatsuya would leave no chances to tease Sona, and because of that Sona too would lose her cool and snap at him. Even though Sairaorg was happy seeing that her sister had started to enjoy more, she was jealous of Tatsuya because it was him and not her that Sona would open up to. She would often glare at Tatsuya, which he responded with a smile. Seeing him smile, Sairaorg would simply sign and let that be, as Tatsuya treated her good even though she was childish and clingy. Tatsuya would not complain or felt annoyed by her, unlike others. She even thought of asking him to join her peerage but stopped thinking about it as she felt Sona would want to add him in her peerage. They still didn't know that all the members of the Shiba house were related to supernatural world, and they too decided to not tell them. Tatsuya also started to train Himari the same way he started with Miyuki. Himari was low high-class level at the time she joined them, and at the beginning of the training she was overwhelmed by the amount of training Tatsuya made her do and wanted to retort, but she stopped when Miyuki said, not even able to do this much, how cute, Shinomiya Kagaya style. Every time she remembered her word, along with her mocking tone would ignite new passion in her and stopped complaining about her training. Even though her way was wrong, Miyuki still motivated her and was often praised by Tatsuya because of it. But even though Tatsuya praised her, she was a bit disturbed as she was helping a rival. Kurumi also trained her in chakra and senjutsu, and her being a yokai and a nekashu at that her progress skyrocketed and she gained another tail. She also started to spar with Miyuki from time to time as both of them were around the same level. Tatsuya too tagged along with them in their spar, though both of them would be against him as they were still not able to land a hit on him as Tatsuya held back a little less than usual. He again gave the same quest to Himari like the one he gave to Miyuki. If she would be able to land a hit on him, he would give her a weapon. Knowing that she would get a new weapon, she was very excited and trained more seriously than before. Seeing that she was doing good, Tatsuya also trained her in ki manipulation, which she used along with her chakra to strengthen her body, and infusing her ki with tuki made her physical attacks more powerful. She had a bit problem in flying, but training regularly made her better in it. She has also started to try to control the dark energy, and with Tatsuya's help she was able to control a slight bit of it. She was overjoyed when she was able to control the power which labeled her as cursed. She ran towards Tatsuya and hugged him while silently crying with happiness. Tatsuya did nothing and patted her head and scratched her ears. After a while Himari too started purring, and when Tatsuya let his guard down while caressing her ears, she took advantage of it and pulled his head and kissed him. Tatsuya, though he was surprised, didn't refuse her and enjoyed the kiss. Seeing that, Miyuki and Kurumi felt slightly jealous but let it go as they knew that Himari was happy for overcoming her curse. Like others, now Kurumi had something to train. Though she was not able to use magic or ki, she was able to use tuki, which Himari taught her. She was very interested in it as it was a new concept to her and tried her knowledge too from her previous world to make it suitable to be used by her. Like this, 2 years passed. Both Miyuki and Himari at the bottleneck of breakthrough to the ultimate class but were not able to break that cap. They were very disappointed with it as their progress till now was very fast, but now their growth rate had slowed down, but they didn't thought about it too much. They just need to train much harder and with time they would be able to break through it. Right now Tatsuya and the others were in their time chamber having a spar. Tatsuya had grown taller and now his childish face was a little less evident as he looked slightly more matured. He now has fine muscles but was not ripped. He now looked much more handsome than before that even Sona blushed whenever she saw her smile, which made Sairaorg jealous, but she too felt that Tatsuya looked handsome. Himari has started to become more beautiful and had started to get mature. She also became tall and her breasts had started to grow as well. Miyuki too has become more beautiful but was still a bit childish. She also gained a bit height and her breasts grew as well, though they were smaller than Himari's. "Is this all you got, huh?" said Tatsuya while dodging Himari's slash. He jumped back but suddenly felt something behind him. He immediately turned around and swung his sword, cutting an ice shard aimed at him. He looked at Miyuki. "Attacking someone's back, huh? I didn't know you would use something like this, Miyuki." Miyuki smiled at him and said, "Do you think that we have any chance of hitting you if you tried to fight you nicely, Oni-sama?" Tatsuya didn't said anything and gave her a bright smile. Miyuki sighed and then looked at him with seriousness. Tatsuya also stopped and jumped up and avoided the slash from Himari. "Don't forget about me." Himari smirked and also followed him, and both of them started clashing their swords. Miyuki didn't waste any time and launched multiple ice spears accelerated with wind magic towards Tatsuya. Feeling that the ice spears were coming towards him, he kicked Himari, who blocked it with her katana but still flew back. Tatsuya started to store fire energy in his sword and slashed forward, releasing a huge wave of fire towards Miyuki, melting the spears in the way. Seeing the wave coming towards her, Miyuki stabbed her sword on the ground, and a thick wall of ice formed in front of her, but immediately flew back when she noticed that her wall would not be able to hold back the wave. Tatsuya just stood there and placed the sword on his shoulders and said, "What happened, giving up?" Miyuki and Himari looked at him and gritted their teeth. Just as they were about to give up, Tatsuya said, "How about this then? Even if one of you is able to hit me, I would take both of you shopping." Hearing this, their eyes lit up. They looked at each other and nodded. Himari started to add chakra to her katana, making it sharper and faster, and Miyuki started making multiple spears of ice and again accelerating them with wind magic. Miyuki looked towards Himari for confirmation, who nodded in response. Just as she nodded, Miyuki launched all the spears towards Tatsuya, who again started to store gyre energy in his sword, but was interrupted by Himari, who was cladded in dark energy, and slashed towards Tatsuya. Tatsuya dodged, but Himari again slashed towards him. He kept on blocking and dodging her slashes. Suddenly Himari jumped back, and many spears came near Tatsuya. Tatsuya gripped his sword tighter, and started slashing towards the spears, destroying them with the blade heated with fire magic. Seeing him destroying the spears, Miyuki said something to Himari, and after listening to her whole plan she nodded in approval. Miyuki started channeling more mana through her body, and made a giant boulder and launched towards Tatsuya. Tatsuya, who just finished destroying the spears, suddenly saw her surroundings getting darker. He looked up and blew a whistle before covering his sword with wind and fire, and sent a firestorm towards the boulder, but just as he sent the firestorm towards the boulder, Himari came from behind and attacked him. Tatsuya, who was busy blocking the boulder, made another sword in his other hand and blocked her strike. But he was surprised, as this time Himari grabbed his hand rather than attacking him again. Soon he felt some coldness coming towards him and saw that Miyuki was coming to attack him. Miyuki came too close to him, and seeing that there was no other choice, Tatsuya lifted Himari and threw her at Miyuki. Tatsuya immediately used this chance and added more power to the firestorm and got rid of the boulder. He then looked at the girls and said, "I guess this is enough." The girls didn't said anything but smiled at him. Tatsuya was confused by it, but then immediately looked at the arm which was held by Himari and saw a fine scratch on it and said, "I guess I will take you shopping this weekend." When Tatsuya was busy looking at Miyuki coming closer, she used her claws and made a slash on his arms. The girls jumped happily and gave each other high five and started discussing about the date. Tatsuya, who heard them, could only shake his head and sighed. Chapter 28. I should give him a reward instead. After the spar was over, Tatsuya was approached by Miyuki and Himari, who were looking at him with an expectation. Seeing their look, Tatsuya chuckled and patted their head and praised them. After a while, he stopped, much to the girls' disappointment. He then looked at Himari and said, "Since you were able to land a hit on me, I guess I owe you a weapon." After saying that, a light shine in his hands which made the others close their eyes because of the brightness. When the light dimmed down, they opened their eyes and saw Tatsuya holding a katana with a blue hilt and covered in a blue sheath, Kurokara. Himari was about to take it from his hands, but Tatsuya stopped her and said, "Wait a minute, let me first explain about this weapon to you." Himari stopped and nodded before looking at him intently. Tatsuya also nodded and said, "This is no normal katana. With this you would be able to control flames, more specifically blue flames, which are much more fiercer than normal flames. You are able to activate or deactivate the flames at will, but the control over the flame will depend on your proficiency. If not handled carefully, you can even injure an ally or yourself too, so always bear that in mind." Seeing Himari nod, Tatsuya smiled and gave him the katana before jumping back with Miyuki. Himari, on receiving the katana, was very excited. She slowly took it out of its sheath and caressed her hand over the blade. She then willed the flames to appear, and then suddenly the whole blade was covered in blue flames. She was mesmerized by the flames and stared at it for a while. She then thought of using the flames just like Tatsuya did in their spar and waved her sword. A large amount of flames come out of the katana but seemed uncontrollable. Seeing that Himari was unable to control the flames, Tatsuya stepped forward and used his devouring magic and devoured all the flames. Being all out of energy, Himari fell but was caught by Tatsuya before she hit the floor. She was about to thank him, she received and hit on her head from Tatsuya, who looked at her with a displeased expression and said, "Didn't I told you that the control depends on your proficiency and can even hurt you because of the lack of control? Why did you do something dangerous? Do you seriously wanted to injure yourself and make me worry, huh?" Hearing him, Himari became sad but felt a bit happy that he was worried about her. She hugged him tightly and said, "I am sorry, I won't do something like this again. Thank you for worrying about me." She gave him a peck on his cheek and then buried her head back in his chest, but was soon pulled out by Miyuki, who was looking at her with a glare and said, "You have some nerve by making Oni-sama worried and the taking his advantage, huh?" Himari, who heard her, sighed and said, "You are right, I should not take his advantage in that situation." Miyuki looked at her with a shocked expression, but that soon turned into an angry one when she saw what she did next. Himari looked towards Tatsuya and pulled his face and gave him a deep kiss. She released herself from the kiss with a string of saliva attached to her mouth, with a heavy breathing, and said, "Rather than taking advantage, I should give him a reward for saving me instead." She looked towards Miyuki with a victorious smug which provoked her more, making her lash out at her. Tatsuya, who saw them arguing, sighed and left the room. He didn't want to involve himself into their argument because he knew that even though they bicker a lot, they still treat each other as sisters. He went to take a shower to refresh him after all that training, and also that he was very sweaty from the practice. After taking a bath, Tatsuya changed his clothes and went to help in his restaurant. After completing his shift, Tatsuya went back to his home. After entering his home, he found Himari preparing dinner. He went towards with the intention to help her, but she said, "Just sit back and relax. Let me cook today, as you must be tired too." Tatsuya tried to protest, but Himari didn't listen to him and he finally left the dinner to Himari. Seeing as he had nothing better to do, he decided to take a stroll. He turned towards the others and asked, "You guys want anything? I am going for a stroll." The others thought for a while and told him what they wanted. Kurumi also decided to go inside Tatsuya as it had been a while since she had been there. Tatsuya changed his clothes and set off along with Kurumi inside of him. They both were talking to each other through their mental link while Tatsuya was greeting some people along the way. Many people in his area knew him and they had a good impression of him. After buying the things which he required, Tatsuya was in his way back when he suddenly felt a supernatural presence. Kurumi too felt it and they both decided to check it. Tatsuya stored the things in his pocket dimension and started moving towards the location. Chapter 29. Yo. In a run-down warehouse in Kuoh, many cloaked people were present and were talking to each other, more like trying to pass their time. They seemed to be waiting for someone, but it looked like the people who they were waiting for were late. Unable to bear the boredom and feeling frustrated, one of the cloaked persons slammed his fist in the wall and said, "They are clearly mocking us, making the magician's faction of the Cow's Brigade wait so long. Those devils seem to have a death wish or what?" Hearing him, many other people in the group raised their voices as well. All of them were very irritated, and when one of them rose their voice, the others too let out their emotions and started to complain as well. "Boss, I say that we should kill them the moment they arrive. They have to know that we are not mere pushovers who they can control. Even if they are devils, we are not any less formidable than them." The boss of those magicians didn't said anything and looked at his subordinates and said in a cold voice, "Shut up." Hearing his cold tone, the subordinates stopped complaining and looked at him, waiting to answer them. The boss looked at everybody and then said, "I know that you all are very irritated. I too am bored. But this mission is important. We the magicians need to get hold of any kind of magic power that we can get. We will definitely increase our strength and rule over this world, but we need to have patience. The thing that we will get today will increase our power by a huge margin, so we cannot do anything before we get our hands on it." Hearing their leader's answer, the subordinates calmed down and now waited patiently for the devils to arrive. They too wanted to get their hands on power because in supernatural world, the more power you have, the larger influence you will have, and having higher influence can be a good thing to save one's life from time to time. While they had again started talking to each other, a magic circle appeared inside the warehouse and 5 people came out of the circle. All 5 of them were men, but one of them were carrying 2 girls on his shoulders. The one in the middle of them came forward and said, "Sorry for being late. I hope that you didn't wait for long." The magicians who heard him internally cursed him, and all of them thought, "Like hell, we didn't wait for long. We waited for 3 hours, a freaking 3 hours. Is all that time just a shit to you?" The man who was the boss of the magicians looked towards the devil with an expressionless face and asked, "Have you brought that? And I would also like to inquire why you were so late?" The devil who heard him was dissatisfied with the magician's answer but still held his cool and said, "Yes, we have that, and we are late because we ran into a girl who tried to stop us." Man, seriously, Abaddon clan's magic sure holds up to its recognition that took a hell out of us. When the magician heard this, his eyes widened, and he looked towards to the two girls on one of the devil's shoulders. The man again looked back at the devil who was talking to him and said, "You mean to say that you have brought both a Leviathan and an Abaddon, huh?" The devil looked back with a smug smile and said, "Yes, we have both of them. You want to buy the other one too?" The magician didn't thought too much and said, "Of course, getting the hands on one of the 72 pillars magic is not an opportunity one comes across so easily." The devil's smile broadened and he said, "Of course, and you don't have to worry about restraining them as the Leviathan is asleep, and we have broken the limbs of the Abaddon and her magic is depleted already. Now let's talk about the price." Just as he was about to continue, the devil was engulfed in a tower of flames. The other devils who came along with him were shocked by this and looked towards the magicians with a hateful expression. The boss of the magicians looked at the other devils and said, "Thank you for adding a bonus to our request, and since you have completed your task you all can die." The other magicians who heard him came out of shock and laughed evilly. They understood that their boss was never going to let them live from the beginning. They all started chanting their spells and were ready to attack the devils. The devils who now understood the motives of the magicians started preparing their own magic. Suddenly, a large number of projectiles were fired towards the devils. The devils who saw the number of projectiles coming towards him were very scared and angry. They immediately set up a barrier to protect them, but they knew that the barrier would not hold on long enough. The devil who was carrying the girls was unable to take it any longer and said, "You pieces of shit, you should know that the girls are still with us and will die too." The boss magician who heard this looked at him with an amused expression and said, "You mean these girls?" and tapped his staff on the ground. When he said that, the girls vanished from the devil's shoulder and appeared besides the magician. The devils were shocked by this and were panicking as their bargaining chip was now in their enemy's hands. The head magician was about to attack the devils when suddenly the door of the warehouse opened and a boy came in and raised his hand and said, "Yo, Chapter 30, Dajiza." All the people present there looked towards the man, or more clearly Tatsuya, as if he was stupid, and were wondering what a human was doing there. Even the blonde-haired girl whose limbs were broken looked towards the boy who came and was also wondering what he was doing. Some of the magicians came out of the stupor and then said, "What the hell are you doing here, kid? This is no place for playing, go back now or you will die," and released some of his aura and directed it towards Tatsuya so as to scare him. Tatsuya, who noticed the small amount of aura, shrugged his shoulders and asked, "What are you guys doing here so late at night?" The magicians were surprised on seeing that Tatsuya was not affected by their aura and got angry. One of the magicians walked towards him and grabbed his collar and said, "You didn't hear or what? Wanna have an early death, you shit?" Tatsuya, who was still expressionless, sighed and said, "You know what, forget it, people like you are not used to people asking you politely." Tatsuya then looked at the magician and turned him into stone, Seiki's power, and then freed himself. All the people who saw that were shocked. The magicians who were still young or new were very angry and wanted to attack him, but the sensible and experienced ones were now wary of him. The devils were wary of him as they didn't know whether he was on their side or not. The girl with blonde hair was also having the same thoughts as the other devils. She couldn't trust anyone there. Seeing that the others were still silent, Tatsuya said, "I will ask again what you people are doing here late at night." Hearing his question, one of the younger magician yelled, "It's none of your business, kids, stop interfering if you know what's good for you." Tatsuya glared at the person who said that, making him taking a step back in fear. He then looked around the room and then his eyes landed on the two girls besides the boss magician. The blonde-haired girl noticed Tatsuya looking at her and, as if getting the message, she made a determined expression and said, "Those devils kidnapped us and brought us here in order to sell us." The devils and the magicians looked at the girl with hatred, but then again looked back at Tatsuya when they heard his voice. Is that girl speaking the truth? Hearing him, another inexperienced magician came forward and said, "That's right, now scram before we kill you." Tatsuya then looked at the people present there once more and then gave a tired sigh and said, "Why is this town always has something illegal going on? Oi, which faction do you guys belong to?" Again the same magician answered him and said, "We are from the magician faction of the cows BRI." Just as he was about to finish, the boss magician fired a spell at him and said, "Why the hell are you giving him information so easily?" Tatsuya looked at the boss with a dumbfounded expression and said, "You only realized it just now." All the others looked at him for answers. The man noticed all the people looking at him. He gave a fake cough and said, "State your purpose for coming here, kid. Now you just changed the subject." "Oh well, I came here because I sensed some disturbance in Mana, and now that I know that you all are doing something illegal, I have to do some extermination. Man keeping the town clean because of Yasaka asked me to is very tiring. Well, whatever, just surrender and I will not kill you." The devils and the magicians who heard him started laughing and said, "You will kill us, hey, some of you take care of the best, meanwhile we take care of the devils." The boss was about to turn towards the devils but stopped. What he saw made him very afraid. He saw his men getting disappear in small light particles at the same time when he asked them to attack Tatsuya. Tatsuya was holding 2 silver guns in his hands, and his hands were aiming in the direction in which the bodies of magicians disappeared. He turned towards the boss and said, "Don't say that I didn't warn you." Tatsuya said and started firing at many people present in the room. All of them got shocked and scared and decided to fight back. The magicians started firing spells at him, to which Tatsuya replied by either dodging or nullifying the spells. All of them were driven into a corner, but then suddenly the boss of the magicians came forward. Seeing him walk in front of them, many of his subordinates started cheering and saying stuff like, "Do it, boss," or "We know you can do it." The boss stood still and looked at Tatsuya with determination. Seeing him, his men, and even the devils got excited. The boss raised his staff and said, "Looks like I have to use my trump card." The people who heard him looked towards him excitedly and began discussing about his trump card. The man raised his hands even higher. The others who saw him all thought, "Here it comes," but then suddenly the man kneeled down in Dogza and shouted, "Forgive me, I surrender." And then everyone had a dramatic fall except for Tatsuya, who knew what the man was planning through his telepathy. Tatsuya decided to play along with it and lowered his gun and said, "So you finally decided to surrender, huh?" The boss looked up and nodded his head and said, "There is just one thing that I want to do." When he said that, a large magic circle appeared on the ground, and a lot more magicians emerged from the circle. Seeing the large number of magicians, the fellow magicians regained their confidence, and the devils followed their example and summoned their teammates. The devils and the magicians looked towards Tatsuya, who was still neutral, and started to laugh maniacally. The others also explained the situation to the ones who just arrived, and they too joined them in their laughter. The blonde-haired girl was now worried and scared on seeing the large number of devils and magicians, and thought that she has no way of escape now. The devil and the magician boss pointed their finger at Tatsuya and said, "Now how will you defeat all of us at the same time? We in total are around 50, and that too without adding those devils. So what will you do now, kid? Beg for mercy, and maybe I can give you a painless death," and then pointed his finger on the ground. Tatsuya looked around the warehouse and gave a tired sigh. He brought his hand close and made a sign and said, "Multi-shadow clone jutsu," and then around 500 Tatsuyas appeared with a puff of smoke. Seeing the sheer number of clones, the eyes of all the people in the room were almost popping out. Their throats got dried and were unable to move because of shock. All the Tatsuyas then pointed their guns at them and said, "Now what will you do?" Hearing him, all of the devils and magicians threw their weapons and deactivated their magic, and then all at the same time went into Dajiza position and said, "We are sorry. We are ready to surrender." Hearing them, Tatsuya gave a small smile and said, "Too late," and all of them pulled the trigger at the same time, and everyone in the warehouse except for the girls and Tatsuya vanished in light particles. Chapter 31. Kuroka. After all of the magicians and the devils were killed, Tatsuya looked towards the 2 girls and asked, "Want some help?" The blonde who heard him got out of her stupor and then looked at Tatsuya as if he was a monster. She was still hesitant of him and didn't answer him. Tatsuya, who was waiting for her to answer, sighed and started walking towards her. He squatted down and started to use his magic and to heal her, but didn't heal her instantly as he still didn't know what were her intentions. The blonde-hair girl noticed that Tatsuya was walking towards her and wanted to put up her guard but was unable to. When she saw him crouching down and moving his hand towards her, she closed her eyes and readied herself for more pain, but instead of pain she felt a soothing sensation easing her pain. She looked up and saw that Tatsuya was the reason of that sensation, and then she relaxed a bit and asked, "Who are you? Why are you helping me?" Tatsuya looked back at her and said in an amused voice, "Oh, now you are willing to talk, eh? But you should know that it is common etiquette to introduce yourself first before asking the others." When she heard Tatsuya, she blushed a bit due to embarrassment and said, "Sorry for my rudeness. My name is Keisha Abaddon, a devil, and I thank you for saving not me and the lady beside me." Tatsuya nodded and said, I am Tatsuya Shiba, a human, and I don't misunderstand, I only saved you so as to interrogate you. And if I find you doing something that shouldn't be done here, you will experience a similar fate as those men like before. Keisha, who heard him, shuddered on the thought of what Tatsuya could do to her. She looked in his eyes and said, You don't have to worry, I will answer you to the extent I am able to, but nothing too personal. Tatsuya nodded and removed her hand and stood up and said, I have healed you quite a bit to the extent that you will be back to normal in a week or so, and now death. Suddenly Kurumi appeared beside him. Tatsuya turned towards Kurumi and said, Take them home and put them in the guest room, and don't forget to restrain their magic. I will come back after cleaning the mess here. Kurumi nodded and carried both the girls on her shoulders, and then looked towards Tatsuya. Tatsuya then formed a magic circle and Kurumi stepped on it and teleported to his home. Tatsuya gave a tired sigh and started to massage his temples and thought, These type of things are increasing in the town lately. I will ask Yasaka later to let me cuddle her tails and ears as compensation. Tatsuya then looked at one of the corners of the warehouse and said, I know you are hiding there, so are you coming out peacefully, or you want me to do it in a rougher way? Tatsuya waited for a moment after saying that, and when he still didn't receive an answer, he moved his hand in that direction, and then various ropes made of magic came out of the ground and then launched in the direction. When the ropes reached the corner, he heard a loud nya. Tatsuya motioned through his hands, and then the rope started coming back with a busted girl who was entangled in the ropes. When the woman was in front of him, Tatsuya looked at her with an expressionless face, but on the inside was a different story. On seeing the girl wearing black kimono with cat ears, only one thought came to his mind, Holy shit! It's Kuroka. I didn't know that I would meet her this soon. Today is definitely a lucky day, meeting 3 characters on the same day. I really want to rub her ears. No, control yourself, Tatsuya, control, you can do it later. Kuroka looked at the boy in front of her and then asked in her usual playful voice, Naya, you like this types of kinky plays, huh? Tatsuya didn't answer her and pointed his gun at her. Kuroka, who saw the gun, got scared as she had seen his power with her own eyes but didn't show it on her face. She looked back at Tatsuya and said, Wait, don't be too stiff, I will talk, so ask whatever you like. Tatsuya lowered his gun and asked, Who are you and what are you doing here, and don't dare lie, I will know it instantly. Kuroka's expression didn't change and she said, Name's Kuroka a Nakomata, as you can see, virgin, and my 3 sizes dash. Just as she was about to continue, Tatsuya again pointed his gun and said, What were you saying? Kuroka didn't flinch, but on the inside she was very afraid. She pouted and said, You are no fun, Naya. I came here to spy on those robed guys which you killed just now to know what they were planning, Naya. Tatsuya used his telepathy and knew that she was telling the truth or not, and found that she was indeed saying the truth. He looked in her eyes and asked, Which faction do you belong to? Were you also trying to do trafficking? Tatsuya narrowed his eyes and glared at her. Seeing his glare, Kuroka for the first time changed her expression into that of panic and said, No, we were not doing anything of that sorts. I just came here to spy on them, that's all, Naya. Tatsuya looked at her for a while, but Suddenly he heard a growl. He looked at Kuroka's stomach, which was making a noise, and looked back at Kuroka, who was laughing awkwardly with a slight blush on her face. On seeing her expression, Tatsuya sighed, and put his gun down and then released her. Kuroka instantly fell on her butt. She looked back at Tatsuya with fake tears in her eyes and said, Is this how you treat a lady, Naya? You should treat a delicate flower like me with care, Naya. Tatsuya scoffed and said, Yeah, like someone delicate would be sent to spy on that many and powerful enemies, and offered his hand. Kuroka took her hand and then stood up while rubbing her butt and said, Humph, who said a delicate person cannot be skilled, Naya? Tatsuya sighed in annoyance and said, Whatever, come with me, you are hungry, right? Let's go, my treat. Kuroka, who heard him, hugged her body and said, Oh, you want to take advantage of me by making me come with you for food? You pervert, Naya. Tatsuya looked back at her and gave her a head chop and said, Quit playing around, either come with me or leave. I have many other things to do. Kuroka rubbed her head and said, Hey, didn't I say that I am delicate? Handle me with care, Naya. Tatsuya ignored her and asked, You coming or not? Kuroka used her senjutsu and knew that Tatsuya didn't have any ill will towards her. She humphed and jumped on his back and said, Okay, let's go. Tatsuya looked at her and asked, Why are you on my back? Kuroka pressed her breasts against his back and licked his ear and said, What? Don't tell me you don't like the sensation on your back, Naya. Tatsuya blushed a bit and then looked in front and started walking. Kuroka, who saw his blush, felt proud of her body. She then started poking his cheek and asked, "By the way, what's your name, Naya? You haven't introduced yourself yet, Naya." Tatsuya came out of the warehouse and looked back at her and said, "My name is Tatsuya Shiba, a human. Nice to meet you." Kuroka now saw his face clearly as they were now outside the warehouse and blushed a bit. She regained her composure soon and said, "Nice to meet you as well, Naya." Tatsuya and Kuroka kept on talking to each other while Tatsuya was walking back to his restaurant. Kuroka suddenly hugged him tighter and asked, "So asking you out of curiosity, why didn't you kill me? Were you mesmerized by my beauty, Naya?" Tatsuya kept silent for a while and said, "Well, I felt no malice from you like I sensed from those guys I killed, and you even spoke the truth, though you were at gunpoint at that time. But still you didn't lie, and you were also able to mask your fear very well, and it was also a waste to kill a cute girl like you without any reason." He then looked back at her and said, "Don't misunderstand though, make a wrong move and you are dead." Kuroka didn't said anything and laid out her head on his shoulder and blew in his ear and said, "Oh, I am cute, Nai." Tatsuya shuddered and blushed a bit and said, "Yup, you are, but don't do such a thing again." Kuroka smiled mischievously but also felt happy on being called cute by him. On the whole way she kept doing various things to tease Tatsuya, making him blush and feel embarrassed, much to his displeasure. Chapter 32. Scary Miyuki. After reaching their home, Tatsuya put Kuroka off his back and then opened the door. As soon as the door opened, he was tackled by a blur. Tatsuya caught the blur and then lifted it up. Tatsuya saw Miyuki, who was looking at him with a cold expression. Before Tatsuya could say anything, Miyuki grabbed his shoulder and started shaking him and said, "Oni-sama, why are you so late? Who are the girls you sent earlier? Am I not enough for you?" Miyuki then looked at Kuroka, who was standing behind Tatsuya, seeing all that with an amused expression. Miyuki again looked back at Tatsuya and said, "You brought another girl like the thieving cat here. Why, Oni-sama, why?" She kept on tightening her grip while shaking him. Tatsuya, who was being shaken, was thinking, "Here we go again." Tatsuya, who had enough of being shaken, held Miyuki's head and gave her a kiss. Miyuki stopped shaking him and started to melt in the kiss. They both were enjoying the moment when suddenly Miyuki was pulled back by Kurumi. Kurumi dragged Miyuki back and said, "That should be enough for now, and don't forget you are not the only lover here." From the side, Himari raised her hand and said, "That's right, there is me too. Now come, Tatsuya, give me a kiss and maybe we can advance further." As soon as she said that, an ice shard grazed her cheek, and there was some blood flowing from the cut. A clear "tch" was heard by all of them. Everyone looked at Miyuki, whose hand was aimed at Himari. She glared at Himari and said, "Oi, thieving cat, listen properly. If someone is going to take Oni-sama's virginity, that would be me." Himari's claws came out and she too glared at Miyuki and said, "Dare to repeat it again," and started to attack Miyuki. Miyuki also didn't stand still and started attacking Himari. They kept on fighting for a while and wrecking the house. Tatsuya sighed in annoyance and started releasing his aura and said in a cold voice, "Stop this right now." All the people who experienced the pressure fell on the ground and were amazed on seeing Tatsuya's power. Both Miyuki and Himari wanted to refute, but when they noticed Tatsuya's glare, they shuddered and nodded their heads in approval. Tatsuya stopped releasing his aura, making everyone taking a deep breath simultaneously. Tatsuya looked at Himari and Miyuki and said, "Clean all this mess right now or no dinner for you tonight." Himari looked at him and said, "Hey, I was the one who cooked tonight, how can I not be allowed to eat it?" Tatsuya looked back at her and said, I not clear?" Himari immediately nodded her head fiercely and gave a salute. Tatsuya nodded and said, "Kurumi, how are those two?" Kurumi looked back at him and said, "They both are fine. I have placed them in the guest room, but they both are sleeping right now. They must have a rough day." Tatsuya nodded and said, "Well, whatever, I will interrogate them tomorrow." He then gestured towards Kuroka and said, "Well, she is Kuroka Anekishu. She will be having dinner with us tonight, but if you find her doing anything suspicious, feel free to attack her. But only if you find her acting suspiciously." He said the last part while looking at Miyuki, who averted her eyes. Kuroka, who heard him, pulled his hands between her cleavage and said, "You are terrible, Tatsuya. You are saying such mean things even after you did that to me," and started sniffing. Suddenly she felt killing intent aimed at her. Tatsuya also noticed the killing intent and said, "If you don't want to die, I would advise it would be best if you explain them properly." Kuroka then looked at the girls and saw them preparing their claws and magic to attack her. Miyuki glared at her and said, "You are trying to seduce Oni-sama. This is very suspicious. I should kill you." Kuroka immediately left his hand and did a dajiza and explained all the things that happened at the warehouse to them. Kuroka was still kneeling down and Miyuki was pointing her sword at her and said, "So you were just tied down by Oni-sama, that's all?" To which Kuroka nodded fiercely. Miyuki narrowed her eyes and said, "So you are not trying to seduce him, right?" Kuroka looked back at her and said, "Yup, I am not trying to seduce him even though he is handsome, strong and the body which I felt through his shirt." She started drooling a bit while imaging Tatsuya's body. Miyuki saw that and immediately slashed her. Kuroka, who suddenly came back to her senses, dodged the attack and hid behind Tatsuya while holding him tightly and said, "Save me, Tatsuya, she is scary. She will definitely kill me." Before he could say anything, Miyuki came in front of him and said, "Oni-sama, stand aside, I will kill this bitch right now." Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Miyuki language." Miyuki snapped and said, "Fuck the shut up about language right now, I will fucking kill that bitch right now." All the people who looked at her had only one thought, scary. Tatsuya was about to say something but was again interrupted by Kuroka, who looked at Miyuki and said, "Hey, it's not my fault. How can one not be enchanted by a body and face like that? It's only natural, even you all like that about him, right?" Kuroka lifted Tatsuya's shirt, making everyone present in the room look at him with a blush. Miyuki too lowered her sword and started looking intently at Tatsuya's chiseled body. Tatsuya noticed that everyone was now quiet and said, "Miyuki, leave her for now. I have to ask her some questions, and I was also the one who invited her for dinner, so if you kill her it would make me look bad." Miyuki nodded her head and was still blushing. She looked at Kuroka and said, "Okay, Oni-sama, I will let her live for now. Hey, you be thankful to Oni-sama's kindness or you would be dead by now." Kuroka hurriedly nodded her head and then grabbed Tatsuya's legs and said, "Thank you so much, Tatsuya-sama, because of you I am alive. I will definitely pay you back. You can even use my body however you like." She said the last part by grabbing her boobs. Miyuki started gritting her teeth and said, "I should have known, you should be better off dead," and then again started attacking her. Tatsuya sighed and then looked at Himari and Kurumi. They too looked back at him, and as if all of them had the same thought, they left the room without saying anything, making Kuroka glare at them. Chapter 33. Interrogation. After all the mess was over, Tatsuya had to prepare the food once again, as the food prepared by Himari was ruined during the fight between Miyuki and Kuroka. They all had dinner after that, and Kuroka left and promised to visit him from time to time. The next day after waking up, Tatsuya did his morning workout and then took a bath. After taking a bath, Tatsuya decided to check on his two guests and went towards the guest room. He knocked on the door and said, "I am coming in," and entered the room. Inside the room he saw two girls, one blonde and the other having purple-colored hair, lying on the bed. Kisha turned her head and looked at him and said, "You have no manners or what? You entered the room even before I gave you the permission. What would you do if I was changing my clothes?" Tatsuya looked at her with a neutral expression and said, "First, this is my house so I can go anywhere I want. Second, all your limbs are literally broken. How the hell would you be able to change your clothes?" Kisha, who heard her reasoning, blushed in embarrassment and looked away. Tatsuya didn't give it much thought and said, "Anyway, since you have woken up, I would like to ask you some questions and I hope you cooperate." Kisha looked at him seriously and said, "Okay, ask whatever you want and I will try my best to tell you what you want to know, but like I said before, I am not going to tell you anything way too personal." The atmosphere was turning very serious, but was broken when a growl was heard from Kisha's stomach. Tatsuya looked at her, gave a mocking smile. When she saw the smile, her blush deepened and she said, "It's not like that, it's just that I have not eaten anything since yesterday." Tatsuya chuckled a bit and said, "You don't have to be embarrassed about it. Wait for a bit, I will go and get us some breakfast, it's nearly time for that." Tatsuya went out of the room, leaving behind a blushing Kisha, who looked at the door for a while and then turned away. Tatsuya came back after a while with some sandwiches and then pulled a chair and sat beside Kisha. He took a sandwich from the plate and moved his hand towards Kisha's mouth. Kisha looked at the sandwich for a while, hesitating. Tatsuya noticed it and took a bite from it and ate it and said, "There's nothing mixed in it, so you don't have to worry about it. Now say ah," and gave a small smile. Kisha wanted to refute him but knew that her hands were broken and she could not eat by herself. She gritted her teeth but still took a bite and immediately got taken aback by the taste. Seeing her pleasant expression, Tatsuya smiled unconsciously, as it always made him happy when others eat his food with a pleasant expression. Kisha looked at the smiling Tatsuya and was mesmerized by him. She kept staring him for a while but regained her consciousness when Tatsuya touched her mouth with a sandwich. She unconsciously took a bite and ate it. After eating for a while, she suddenly remembered that she had an indirect kiss with him and immediately blushed. She wanted to complain about it, but when she noticed that Tatsuya wasn't even a slightest bit affected by it, she stopped and didn't say anything. Tatsuya noticed the change in her and used his telepathy to know what she was thinking. When Tatsuya heard her thoughts, he sighed and then bowed his head and said, "I am sorry for making you uncomfortable," and then began eating a sandwich himself. Kisha, who heard his apology, smiled and thought, "He isn't that bad." She then came out of her thoughts and said, "So what do you want to ask me?" Tatsuya stopped eating and made a serious expression and said, "I already know your name and that you are a devil. What I want to know is whether you are a stray or not, and why you got involved with those people in the first place, and who is the one beside you." Kisha also adopted a serious expression and said, "No, I am not a stray devil, and I got involved with them while completing a mission for my master." "What mission, and who is your master?" asked Tatsuya. Kisha hesitated for a bit and said, "I am the queen of Sairaorg Bale. You know about the devil peace system, right?" Tatsuya just nodded to her question. Kisha also nodded and said, "You see, someone close to my master is suffering from a similar disease like the girl besides me, and he asked me to check whether the doctors had made some progress about her condition. So I went to check on her and then And then you saw her being kidnapped and decided on your own to save her without even knowing how much strong your opponent is. I don't know whether to praise your bravery or ridicule you for your foolishness," interrupted Tatsuya. When Kisha heard him, she became angry and wanted to argue, but was again interrupted by Tatsuya, who said, "You didn't even consider anything before considering your actions at all. How would your king would have felt if he came to know that you got harmed because of the mission he sent you on, huh? Do you know how your friends and family would have responded to it?" Tatsuya raised his voice a bit, making Kisha taken aback by shock. She felt sad and discouraged about her actions and was very depressed, but suddenly she felt something on top of her head. She looked up and saw Tatsuya patting her head. She observed him for a while and asked, "What are you doing?" "Patting your head." "No, I am asking you, why are you doing it?" Tatsuya sighed and said, "During all these years I have learned that patting someone's head affectionately is the best way to make them feel better when they are depressed." Tatsuya looked back at her and said, "If you hate it, I will stop." Kisha didn't say anything, and Tatsuya smiled and said, "Though you were reckless, I guess you do deserve some praise for saving that girl." Kisha became confused and said, "I didn't save her, you were the one who saved us." Tatsuya smiled at her and said, "But if it weren't for you delaying them, they would have arrived in the town while I was working, and I would have ignored them, and she would be sold to those magicians." Kisha, who was disheartened just a moment ago, smiled and said, "You know what, you are not as bad as I thought you were." Tatsuya didn't say anything and kept on patting her head silently, but suddenly the room got chilled and then both of them heard a voice. "Oni, Isama, you are flirting behind my back." Chapter 34. I can heal her. After consoling Miyuki for a while, Tatsuya sighed in relief. He again looked back at Kisha, who was looking at him and was appreciating his help. She was feeling that she just dodged a bullet and was very grateful to Tatsuya. Tatsuya thought for a while and then said, "Kisha, it would take a while for you to recover, so if you want you can stay here for the time being." Kisha shook her head and said, "No, there is no need for that, just remove the restraints and I will contact my master." This time Tatsuya shook his head and said, "Sorry, I cannot do that, because even if I trust you a bit, but you are still a devil, and I don't know what would be the intentions of your master and the other devils after knowing about us." Kisha wanted to say that her master wasn't like that, but thinking from Tatsuya's point of view, she realized that what he said was true. She then sighed and said, "Then what about this girl? She is in need of medical treatment and should be sent to the underworld for that." Tatsuya looked at her weirdly for a while and then said, "Are you really stupid, or what? The girl beside you is a Leviathan, a descendant of an original Mao. Do you really think that some mere low-class devils could kidnap her for selling her that easily?" Suddenly realization hit her and she looked at Tatsuya with widened eyes and said, "You mean to say that she was being sold by the higher-ups from the Devil Society?" Tatsuya nodded and said, "Yeah, that's what I am saying. You must have noticed it as well, right? Something like no surveillance cameras in her ward or no guards around her room." Kisha thought for a while and then nodded her head and said, "Yeah, just like you said, while I was visiting her I didn't see any guards there." Tatsuya sighed and said, "You devils really are twisted. Well, anyways, she must have been sold as she was not useful to them, as they cannot extract any information from her as she was unconscious, and sustaining her medical bills must be draining them, so she was sold in order to fill those bills, I guess. Keisha was enraged at the higher-ups but knew that she couldn't do anything about it. She didn't have any evidence about it against them. She gave a tired sigh and said, "Nonetheless, it doesn't solve the matter of her needing medical care at all. What should we do about that?" Tatsuya didn't said anything, and went towards Ingvild and grabbed his hand and closed his eyes. Keisha looked at him intently, and was wondering what he was doing. Soon Tatsuya opened his eyes and said, "I can cure her, so that problem's solved. She just needs some magic, that's all. It might take a day or two depending on how much magic her body can take at a time." When Keisha heard him, her eyes lit up. She looked at him expectantly. Tatsuya noticed her looking at him and asked, "What?" Keisha didn't hesitate and asked, "If you are able to heal her, can you check on the other person that I talked about?" Tatsuya remained silent and thought, "Helping Sairaorg now would mean exposing devils about my presence, and all of that will be very annoying if they start to pester us to join their peerages. Not to mention there are too many perverts and womanizers among the devils." Keisha started to get worried as Tatsuya remained silent. She thought that Tatsuya was going to deny her request. While she thought that Tatsuya was thinking about the pros and cons of revealing himself, and finally decided to help him, and thought, if they become too much of a nuisance, then there would be one less faction in this world. Just hope that they don't go on my bad side for their own safety. He looked back at Keisha and said, "Okay, I will help her, but make sure that the people on your side don't annoy me too much, otherwise I cannot promise about their well-being." Tatsuya just gave a smile, making Keisha shudder on thinking what he did that night in the warehouse. She nodded her head and said, "I promise that I will make sure to let them know about it, and I thank you a lot for accepting my request." Tatsuya then looked back at Ingvild and started transferring his magic to her, and could feel that her sacred gear was absorbing all that energy. He sighed and then sent a telepathic message to the others and told them about his talk with Keisha, and also asked them to not slack on their training, making them complain, but accepted immediately when he promised them to take them on a date. Tatsuya sighed, but he also felt happy that Miyuki and the others loved him a lot. He had decided that whoever tried to interfere him or the others in the future would only suffer their own doom by his hands. He has the power, and he would use it against others if they stand in his way. He then looked back at the girls present in the room and saw that both of them are sleeping peacefully. He looked at Keisha and thought, even though I am not a guy who take advantages of others while they are asleep, but to sleep so defenseless when there is a guy in the room. He smiled at her and thought, well, let's not break her faith in me. He closed his eyes and laid back in a relaxed position with a satisfied look on his face, but suddenly his expression changed to that of panic and thought, shit. Sarah will annoy me way too much once she will know that I am a part of the supernatural world. Man, I only hope that she don't get mad at me. Well, if that situation comes, I will use Sona as a bait, I guess. And shrugged his shoulder and went back to sleep. Somewhere in the underworld at two different locations, two girls suddenly sneezed. Sairaorg thought, what's this? Did Sotan is thinking about me, or it could be Tatsuya as well. Now that I think about it, he has grown a lot since then, and he is much handsome now. If Sotan doesn't make her move fast, then I guess I would take him instead, but there is Miyuki and the others too. Oh well, it doesn't matter, I just have to somehow convince Miyuki, I guess. I will ask her when I visit them next time. Sona's thought. That guy Tatsuya must be thinking about something, setting me up again. Sigh. Well, whatever, I will face it when I visit him next time. Come to think of it, I have not visited him from a long time. I want to play chess with him again. It's very boring staying here all the time. Last time was also a draw, but I was barely able to turn the tables, or he would have won. Maybe this time he could defeat me. Wait, but if he defeats me then dash. Sona started blushing, and Tsubaki, who saw him, asked, Sona-sama, are you again thinking about Tatsuya? Sona's blush deepened and she said, and no, why would I think about that idiot? Tsubaki smiled at her antics and said, I would like to meet him the next time you visit. To be able to make the cold Sona like this, he must be something. Sona averted her eyes and said, I don't like him at all, do you understand? Tsubaki came in front of her and smirked and said, oh, but I didn't said anything about liking him. Steam seemed to come out of Sona's head and she glared at Tsubaki and shouted, there's nothing like that. Chapter 35. Can't she do it in one go? After supplying his magic to Ingvild for a whole day, there was still no change in her body condition. Tatsuya sighed and was wondering how much more magical power would the sacred gear consume. Keisha, who was also in the room, was now wondering whether Tatsuya was telling her the truth about knowing a way to curing Wild or not, but decided to believe him as she had a bit confidence in him. Tatsuya was getting bored from sitting all the time and decided to talk with Keisha, to which she complied as she too was feeling bored. She started to tell him about her family, friends, and master. She even told him about the things from which her master went through. Hearing about Sairaorg, Tatsuya felt a bit sad for him, but not too much, as he knew that life could be very cruel. In the past, even Miyuki was left homeless by her relatives who broke all the ties with him and her, and they only belonged to a normal human family. So Sairaorg's case was not too astonishing to him, as he was an aristocrat family among the devils, and not being up to the mark in their eyes would have certainly led him to such a fate. Despite all this, Tatsuya had a good impression of him from all the things that Keisha had told Tatsuya about Sairaorg. Even by driving him to a corner and not being able to use his family's heritage magic, he didn't get disheartened and decided to make a path for himself and show others that he is not worthless. That type of thinking made Tatsuya feel that he was very admirable, and now he wanted to meet him soon. Keisha, who heard Tatsuya praise her master, felt proud and also thought that Tatsuya was not like others who would either feel pity or would feel that her master was worthless. She was even shocked by the type ideology that Tatsuya had. She talked some more to Tatsuya and even started asking questions herself, and when she come to know that he was a leading novelist and mangaka, she was very excited. She too was a fan of his work and went into a complete fan mode after that. After hours of questions and answers between Tatsuya and Keisha was over, Tatsuya gave a tired sigh. He had now decided not to tell about his profession about a novelist or a mangaka to anyone. He was glad that she was not a die-hard otaku, or he would have been way too tired. Tatsuya left the room after a while and decided to relax for a bit. He has been transferring his magical power for a whole day, and seeing that it would take a bit more time for her to wake up, he postponed the treatment for later. He then went out in the town for a stroll, visiting various places along the way. While walking, many girls were looking at him with lust, which Tatsuya just ignored. He has been experienced it now, and now knows that the best way in these sort of situations is to just ignore them. He was also a bit happy as he knew that his looks were good and he felt proud about it. He unconsciously smiled while thinking that, and all the females started to blush even more. Some of them even had nosebleeds when they looked at him. Tatsuya then felt killing intent aimed at him from all the directions, and he got out of daze. He then looked around and saw all the males glaring at him. Tatsuya was confused for a bit, but then he looked at some females blushing. He sighed and thought, so that's what the killing intent was, huh? It's not my fault that I look good. I know that this is an anime world, but still jealousy in this world is on another level. He then looked at old man couple looking at him, and Tatsuya stiffened on seeing their expression. He looked at the old man. Gigi, why are you glaring at me like all these worthless younger men and dash? He then looked at the old woman beside the man who looked like his wife and thought, why the hell is that hag winking at me? He then looked at the old man again, who gave him a smug smile on seeing Tatsuya's reaction and showed Tatsuya his middle finger. Tatsuya's lips twitched and he mouthed a fuck you and then walked away. Tatsuya was continued his stroll around the city, but then he suddenly felt some supernatural disturbance. He sighed and thought, seriously, this town has a lot of problems, and why is she involved in this again? She just visited the town a few days ago. What is her work this time? Can't she do it in one go? He increased his pace and started to search for an alley. Finally seeing one, he instantly entered it and teleported to the location. Chapter 36. It really is an anime world. After teleporting nearby to the location, he started walking towards the source. As he started to get nearby, he felt a barrier preventing him from entering. He shrugged his shoulders and entered the field. After walking for a while, he started noticing some magic attacks being fired. He started walking faster, and once he saw his acquaintance, Kuroka, he stopped and looked at fight taking place in front of him. He decided to observe them for a while and created a sofa for himself and sat down in a relaxed position with a soft drink in his hand, which he took out from his dimension pocket. He was casually sipping on his drink while enjoying the fight taking place in front of him. While he was looking at the fight, he thought, she really lives up to her tilta of a SS-class stray devil, but both Himari and Miyuki can also fight on par with her if they fight together. Though it would be a different case if I told them that I would reward them if they are able to beat her. Miyuki might even defeat her alone in such condition. At the same moment in Shiba house. Miyuki. Achoo. What is this? Did I catch a cold? No. It must be Oniai-sama thinking about me. Kyaa. He thinks about me even when he is away from me. He really loves me a lot. Suddenly Himari and Kurumi barged into the room and shouted at the same time, "Shut up, it's the middle of the night. And why the hell are you sleeping in Tatsuya's room?" Tatsuya continued to observe the fight, then he suddenly noticed something on the field and thought, "Oh, a sneak attack, huh?" and disappeared from his sofa. The next moment he appeared on the field and punched two guys present near him and said, "You should watch your back as well." Kuroka, who recognized the voice, got surprised and turned around and looked at Tatsuya in astonishment. The others present on the field were also surprised and were wondering who the new entry was. Kuroka looked at him for a while and then latched onto him and hugged him like a koala and looked up and asked, "Tatsuya Naya, when did you arrive here? Did you come here to save me, Naya?" Tatsuya looked back at her and said, "Oh, I was here for a while and was watching your fight from there," and pointed his finger in the sofa's direction. Everyone present there turned their heads and looked in that direction and saw a sofa present there, and all of them had a sweat drop. Kuroka looked back at him with widened eyes and asked, "You were watching me fight?" "Yep," Tatsuya replied. "And you didn't even try to help me?" asked Kuroka. Tatsuya gave him a small smile and placed his hands on both of her cheeks. Kuroka got in daze and was about lean forward for a kiss, but suddenly her cheeks were pulled. Tatsuya looked at her with a smile and asked, "What the hell are you doing in the town?" "Wah," replied Kuroka with unclear words as her cheeks were being pulled. Tatsuya's smile didn't waver and he asked, "What I am asking is, what business did you have in the town when you just visited a few days ago?" Kuroka, who now understood his question, widened her eyes and said, "I see he to tell you abo sumhi. I came here to talk to you about something." Tatsuya somehow understood her and asked, "And what would that be?" Kuroka was about to answer him, but Tatsuya stopped her and said, "Wait, we will talk after all this is over," and released her. Kuroka, who got released, grabbed her red and swelled cheeks and said with some tears in her eyes and said, "Tatsuya Naya, you are very mean. How can you do this to me?" Tatsuya snorted and said, "You are asking me how can I do this to you? You are asking me how can I do this to you? Because of people like those guys," while pointing at her attackers, "a part of my day is always packed with exterminating these things, and today I was already very tired and didn't wanted to do an extermination today, but you have to be involved in today's situation. Why the hell is my life so messed up?" Tatsuya stopped his ranting and started to breath heavily. He took out some water from his storage and started drinking. While he was drinking, Kuroka looked intently at him and asked, "Then do you mean that you only came because I was involved and could have gotten hurt?" Tatsuya stopped drinking and looked at her weirdly and asked, "Why the hell are you asking that question? Isn't that obvious? I didn't came here to look after those guys, though being worried about you might be too much." Kuroka's lips twitched on hearing his answer, but then she smiled and looked at him and asked, "Nay Tatsuya, can I ask something from you?" Tatsuya looked back at her and asked, "What?" Kuroka's smile widened and she asked excitedly, "Will you make kittens with me, Naya?" As soon as she said that, Tatsuya knocked her head with his fist and said, "Do you really think that it is the right time to ask such a thing?" He then looked at the others and said, "And why the hell are you guys standing there silently? Do you have brains or not? You should be attacking us or should be planning an attack, at least, you degenerates." Tatsuya gave a heavy sigh and thought, it really is an anime world. Chapter 37. Worthless Human. The people present there who were attacking Kuroka earlier were silently watching the interaction between the SS-class stray devil and the newcomer human. They were then brought back from their stupor by the human insulting them. The leader of those men got angry and said, "Why, you shitty human? How dare you call us devil degenerates?" We were waiting silently because he paused for a while thinking about something and said, "Because we were giving you some consideration, as this will be your last time talking. Yeah, that's why, right guys?" The others who heard his excuse were looking at him with an expression which said, "Seriously," but nonetheless his subordinates agreed to his claim. Tatsuya sighed in annoyance and said, "You know what, I am not in the mood right now, so why don't you go back silently without causing any troubles, and we can just leave it as it is." After saying that, Tatsuya thought, following the anime cliché, these men will now start to insult me, and then will then spout some shit about killing me and all, and taking Kuroka along with them. The devils heard him and snorted. Tatsuya just sighed and thought, here it comes. The leader then came forward and said, "Human, you think you are some tough shit or what? Yeah, you are just a worthless human. Why would we follow your orders, human? Yeah, we can kill a human like you anytime we want. You humans are just like some slaves to us devils. Yeah, human, and after taking your worthless human life, we will take that stray devil with us. We can even have some fun with her before killing her as well. Tatsuya, who heard them speaking nonsense, looked at them blankly and said, "Aren't you guys saying human a lot?" The devils looked at each other and then looked back at Tatsuya and said, "Yeah, so what?" Tatsuya looked at them with a deadpan expression and said, "Nothing." He then looked at them lazily and said, "You guys think that you can kill me easily because I am a worthless human." The devil leader, who heard him, grinned and said, "Yeah, we can kill you anytime we want." Tatsuya sighed and said, "I am not in the mood of this, but whatever dash." He then looked at them seriously and said, "I will show you the technique of a real worthless human. Any guesses on whose technique he will use?" Tatsuya then started walking towards them and stopped after a while, such that there was some distance between them. The devils who saw him started laughing and said, "What are you scared of us? Want to go back to your mommy?" and then started laughing louder. Tatsuya then took a deep breath and then took a stance. He then looked at his opponents and suddenly shouted, "Wolf Fang Fist," and started attacking them at inhuman speed. The devils who were laughing were suddenly attacked and got serious. They wanted to counterattack him, but he was too fast for them. They could only helplessly see themselves and their comrades getting flown away by the boy whom they had underestimated. After all of them were flown away, Tatsuya stopped and said in a disappointed tone, "As expected, some of them are still alive even after I put a bit of strength in my attacks." As he said that, the devils who were still alive started getting up, looked at him with rage and said, "We will definitely kill you for killing our comrades, you brat," and started firing magic at him. Tatsuya, who saw the attacks coming towards him, just slapped the projectiles away with the back of his hand. He then looked at his opponents and suddenly got an idea and thought, "Well, let's test that out while I am at it." Tatsuya then took something like a handle and held it and said, "Let's check this baby out." He then moved his hand to the side and said, "Neo Ser Veresta activate," and then a sword with a purple energy blade materialized. Tatsuya admired his sword and thought, though it looks like a normal Ser Veresta, it actually is made by combination of swords. It has of course the Ser Veresta, War, Fujin, World Trigger, Organon, World Trigger, Yamato, not the Devil Trigger, though only the space and time manipulation, Devil May Cry, and it can even alter its size and form. The others who saw the sword were surprised, but not much, but there was feeling of dread coming from the sword. Tatsuya then held his sword and moved his hand, said, "Now let the party begin," and then started running towards his opponents. The devils who saw him running towards them started to take a defensive stance, but some of them were late and were instantly cut by his sword. Tatsuya stopped and looked at his sword and said, "It cuts very easily and smoothly. I like it." Suddenly some of the devils attacked him with a sword and he blocked them with his sword and said with an amused tone, "Hope trying to copy me. I am so flattered." But his tone changed immediately to serious and he said, "But that will still not be enough." He pushed them back with his sword and then suddenly the blade of the sword turned green and he said, "Fujin." As soon as he said that, multiple very long green blades came out from the ground and slashed at his enemies, cutting them with ease. All the remaining devils who saw that were frightened beyond comprehension and wanted to run away, but Tatsuya looked at them with a huge smile on his face and said, "You can't escape," and held his sword up and the blade of the sword turned white and he shouted, "Organon." Various blades materialized around him in an orbit with him being at the center. Tatsuya then looked back at his opponent and said, "Bye," and the blades started revolving very fast, cutting all of them quickly and silently. Tatsuya then deactivated his sword and then looked at the handle and said, "This is amazing, but I was still not able to use the last ability. Oh well, the time for that will come as well," and then stored it back. Chapter 38. Kuroka's Confession. After killing everyone in the area except Kuroka, Tatsuya gave a tired sigh. He was about to turn around, but suddenly he felt two soft sensations on his back. He stayed still and silent for a while and then said, "Although I do like the feeling of your boobs on my back, keep in mind that if Miyuki found about this you would be up for a whole lot of trouble." Tatsuya could have sworn that when he mentioned about Miyuki, he felt that Kuroka's body shuddered but came back to normal soon. Kuroka, who was hugging Tatsuya from behind, suddenly bit his ear slightly and said, "You didn't answer my question, you know?" On hearing her, Tatsuya sighed and said, "Are you serious about that? We have literally met each other just a few days ago and only once." Don't you think that I could be a bad guy and could kill you, a stray devil, for a reward from the devils? Kuroka, who heard him, smiled and then hugged him tightly and said, well, I am seriously asking you to make kittens with me, Naya, as you are strong. Tatsuya, who heard her, asked in a neutral tone, so your only reason for asking me that because of my power? Kuroka could tell that even though Tatsuya was calm from outside, from the inside he was a bit angry. She blew some air in his ear and said, also, I don't feel any hostility from you, and before you say something I can tell a person's emotion towards me using senjutsu, and even if you were somehow hiding your emotions, we both know that how easily you could kill me. You even came here to see whether I was safe or not. She then stopped hugging him and came in front of him and bent a little and asked, so I am asking you again, will you make kittens with me, Naya? Tatsuya remained neutral and hit her head with his fist and said, if you have time to fool around, better start explaining why you came here. Kuroka, who was hit by him, had some tears formed at the corner of her eyes and she said, why are you hitting me, Naya, and you still didn't give me an answer? You should not be rude to women, especially those who confess to you, Naya. She then humphed and then pouted. Tatsuya, who saw her pout, couldn't help but blush and thought cute. He sighed and patted her head and said, I will answer your question later, as I don't have that kind of feelings for you yet. Kuroka, who was enjoying his hand patting her head, was purring unconsciously and said, okay, I will leave it for later, but I will keep on trying till you accept me, Naya. Tatsuya, who heard her, looked at her and asked, then what would you do if you found someone stronger than me? Will you ask him the same thing as well? Kuroka, who heard him, pretended to be angry and said with a pout, how rude, I am not a woman like that. Tatsuya didn't said anything and poked her cheeks. She stared at him and Tatsuya stared back. They remained silent for a while and then Tatsuya asked, so what would you do? Kuroka looked at him for a while and said, if that happens then I would wait till you become stronger than that guy and will then ask you again, Naya. Tatsuya chuckled and then asked, and what if I would not be able to surpass him? Hearing his question, Kuroka thought for a while and then said, then I would get stronger myself, Naya, and would kill that guy and then you would be the strongest guy left. Tatsuya looked at her with a blank expression for a while and then both of them burst out laughing. After laughing for a while, Tatsuya sat on the ground and supported himself with his hands. Kuroka, who saw him sitting, sat on his lap and said in low voice, I will keep on pestering you till you agree to make kittens with me, Naya, so you should be ready for that in future. Or you can simply agree to my request. Tatsuya remained silent for a while and closed his eyes. After a while he opened his eyes and said, my answer still remains the same, but who knows what the future have in store for me. Kuroka, who heard him, turned around and gave him a passionate kiss, which Tatsuya returned to her as well. She then separated and said, okay, I will wait till that time, Naya. Tatsuya touched his lips unconsciously, and he would have to admit it that her lips felt soft. He then looked back at her and asked, if you agreed to that, then why did you kiss me just now? Kuroka looked at him with a mischievous expression and said, what? I did agree on waiting on having kittens with you, but that does not mean that I am holding back on anything else, Naya. And you know what dash, she licked her lips lustfully and said, I really enjoyed that, Naya, so you should be careful as I would definitely attack you every now and then. Tatsuya, who heard her, sighed and said, you should not get your hopes up though. Even the residents of the Shiba house have a hard time doing that and could only accomplish it when I either let my guard down, which is very rare, or I allow it myself. Kuroka, who heard him, smirked and said, heh, we will see about that, and again moved forward for a kiss. But just as she was about to touch his lips, Tatsuya stood up, phasing through her body using Kamui, and said, I told you, didn't I? Don't get your hopes up. Kuroka looked back at him with an annoyed expression and said, that's not fair, Naya, you slipped through my body. I was just out to kiss you. Come on, just kiss me on your own, Naya. Tatsuya gave a tired sigh but then gave a rare smile. Kuroka, who felt his emotions through her senjutsu, also smiled and thought, we will have a lot of kittens in the future, Naya, but I will have to deal with that Miyuki person first, Naya. Tatsuya, who heard her through his telepathy, smiled wryly and thought, I just hope that Miyuki don't kill everyone though. It would be very troublesome. Chapter 39. Vali Team. After Kuroka got out of her thoughts, Tatsuya looked at her seriously and asked, Kuroka, now I would expect you to tell me the reason for coming here and be serious now. Hearing him, Kuroka also got serious and said, I came here on behalf of my leader. He wants to meet you and Dash. Kuroka was about to continue but Tatsuya interrupted her and said, if this is about joining your group then forget it. You know better than anyone that your group is a terrorist group, and even though you don't have any ill intentions, you would still not be trusted by the major powers of the world and would most likely face a lot of trouble. The most problematic part among all this is that your family also gets involved in all this somehow, and I don't plan on having them go through all that shit. Hearing his answer, Kuroka sighed and said, "At the very least, can you meet them? They were very interested in you and would like to meet you personally." Tatsuya remained silent and thought for a while, and finally coming at a conclusion turned towards her and asked, "Okay, when do you want me to meet them?" Before Kuroka could answer, a voice interrupted her and said, "How about now?" Both Tatsuya and Kuroka turned their heads and saw 5 people standing over a magic circle. There were 3 males, one with silver hair, one blonde with glasses, and one with brown hair. There were also 2 girls present there as well. One of them was blonde and was wearing a magician's cape and hat, and the other a lowly with black hair. Tatsuya looked at all of them and gave a tired sigh and thought, "Why? Just why are all this shit taking place today? I just wanted to relax for fuck's sake." While Tatsuya was internally ranting, the new party, who just came, started walking towards them. Seeing them approach her and Tatsuya, Kuroka came forward and asked, "Why did you all come? Didn't you all promise that you will not interfere me today?" The male with brown hair wearing a Chinese armor came forward with his staff on his shoulder and said, "You were taking too long, so we came to check on you. We thought that you might be in some sort of trouble, but you look just fine." Kuroka looked back at the person and said, "Shut up, Biko. And there was indeed some trouble, her more appropriately, some devils came to capture me, but I got saved by Tatsuya Naya," and grabbed his hand and placed it between her breasts. Just as she placed his hand between her boobs, Tatsuya came out of his stupor, and then looked back at the others, but he looked more intently at the silver-haired man and the black-haired lowly. The lowly, or more clearly Ophis, stared back at Tatsuya and thought, "I cannot see through him or judge his strength. Well, if he could help me defeat Baka Red, then I don't care." Tatsuya, who heard her through telepathy, smiled inwardly. He freed his hand from Kuroka and walked towards Ophis and stopped in front of her. Everyone was looking at him with wide eyes except for Vali, who was smirking and thought, "Interesting." Tatsuya then formed a chocolate bar in his hand, opened the wrapper and moved his hand towards her. Ophis just looked at the bar and then back at Tatsuya with a blank expression. Seeing her reaction, Tatsuya realized something and then broke a block from the bar and then ate it. Ophis, who saw what he was doing, smelled the chocolate, and after realizing what he was doing, opened her mouth. Seeing her opening her mouth, Tatsuya took a block and placed it near her mouth, and Ophis took it instantly. Imagine Ophis in place of Kana Kemui eating the chocolate from Kobayashi's hand. Tatsuya, who saw her eating chocolate, cutely petted her head. Though Ophis was confused by this, but she didn't stop him. She even felt good when he rubbed her head, but she had a blank expression on her face. While Tatsuya was busy with petting Ophis, the others were looking at him with shock. They all had the same thought while looking at him. Why the hell is he treating a dragon god like some child, and why is Ophis just accepting all that? Vali was the first one to calm down among his team. He then looked at Tatsuya and asked, "Are you quite done with that?" Hearing him, his team members too came out of shock and looked at Tatsuya. Tatsuya looked at Vali and asked in a neutral tone, "What?" Vali was a bit surprised by his neutral expression but didn't said anything and said, "Nice to meet you, my name is Vali and this is my team. I heard from my teammate Kuroka that you were very strong and wanted to meet you." Tatsuya looked at him and said, "Nice to meet you as well, I am Tatsuya," he said neutrally, making Vali a bit pissed. Just as he was about to speak, Biko interrupted him and said, "Oi Kuroka, is he really the one you were talking about? This guy looks very weak to me." Tatsuya looked at Biko with a deadpan expression and pointed at Ophis. "Oi monkey boy, stop judging by looks. This lowly here can destroy you along with all your ancestors without even moving an inch." Hearing his answer, Kuroka started laughing loudly along with Arthur and Lefei, who were trying very hard to control their laughter. Biko looked at his teammates and then at Ophis, who was eating chocolate with a blank look on her face. He sighed and said, "When you put it that way, it does make sense. By the way, the name's Biko, hope we get along well," and moved his hand forward. Tatsuya looked at Hima and asked, "Do you like to lie down doing nothing and just relaxing?" Hearing him, Biko grinned and said, "More than anything." Tatsuya also grinned and shook his hand and said, "Looks like our tastes match, my friend." Vali looked at both of them and said, "That's enough, Biko. Sorry about that, but still I too don't think that you are very powerful. By the way, these are my other teammates, Arthur and Lefei of the Pendragon family." Hearing their introduction, Arthur bowed a bit while Lu Fei just waved her hand. Tatsuya also bowed in response. He then looked back at Vali and said, "Vali, right?" Vali nodded in response. Tatsuya also nodded and said, "You know what, Vali? In a war the most dangerous enemy is not the one who you know is very powerful but the one who you cannot tell about at all. Ain't I right, the great white dragon of supremacy?" As soon as he said that, blue wings materialized on Vali's back. The wings shined and a voice came from them and said, "Ho, a human able to feel my presence, huh? I am impressed." "Indeed you are right, human. And by the looks of it you seem like a person hiding a lot of his strength." Tatsuya just shrugged his shoulders and said, "Who knows? Maybe I am, maybe not." Just as he was about to speak any further, his shirt was tugged by someone. Tatsuya turned around and saw Ophis looking at him. He too looked at her and asked, "What?" Ophis's expression didn't waver and she said, "Human, defeat Baccared for me." Chapter 40. Friend. Tatsuya stared at Ophis for a while and then said, "What?" Ophis, who heard him, stood still and said, "Kill Baccared for me." Tatsuya looked at her with a deadpan expression for a while and then turned to the other and said, "What does she mean by that?" Though Tatsuya knew about what she was talking about, he pretended that he didn't know about it. Ophis was about to say what she said earlier, but before she could, Tatsuya took a block of chocolate and fed it to her. Ophis simply ate the chocolate that Tatsuya gave her and didn't said anything. The others who saw that had a sweat drop and were thinking how easily Tatsuya was able to tame the dragon god. After a while, Arthur gave a fake cough and said, "What Lady Ophis means to convey is that she wants you to help her in defeating Great Red, the true dragon or the dragon of dreams. That is also the sole purpose of her in forming the group Cow's Brigade." Tatsuya looked at them blankly for a while and then looked at Ophis and said, "Why do you want to defeat Great Red?" Ophis looked back at him and said, "He took my silence away and I want it back." Hearing her answer, Tatsuya gave an annoyed sigh and then looked at the others. As if getting what he was asking, Arthur adjusted his glasses and said, "You see, Ophis used to live in the dimensional gap, but one day Great Red also arrived in the gap and started living there. Though at first she didn't minded it, but as the years passed by she started to get annoyed by the dragon, and now wants to move her away from her home." Tatsuya nodded in understanding and said, "Though I understand your reason for your request, but I humbly decline it." He then looked back at Ophis with an apologetic expression and patted her head and said, "Sorry." Though Ophis was enjoying the petting, she looked at Tatsuya and tilted her head and asked why. Tatsuya, who saw her tilt her head, thought cute, but soon shook his thoughts away. He crouched down to her level and said, "You see, I am not interested in fighting that much. I just want to enjoy my life, and joining you will not give me that." Ophis stared at him and asked, "Even though you can get a lot of power from me?" Tatsuya nodded and said, "Yes, even though you can give me a lot of power, which I can easily create with skill creation, I will still not join you." After listening to his answer, Ophis looked blankly at him for a while, but was brought out of her stupor when Tatsuya took another block of chocolate and placed it on her mouth and said, "Though we can still be friends, right?" Ophis unconsciously took the chocolate and then asked, "Friend?" Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "Yes, friend. After all, it is better to be on each other's good side. Or is it that you don't want to meet me again?" Ophis shook her head and asked, "Will you give me more of that?" while pointing at the chocolate, "if we became friends." Hearing him, Tatsuya and the others, except Vali, started laughing. After controlling his laughter a bit later, Tatsuya looked at Ophis and said, "Of course I would give you lots of chocolates. So friends?" and moved his hand forward. Ophis took his hand and shook it and said, "Friends." Tatsuya shook her hand for a while and then stood up and said, "Well, I think it's very late. I should be heading home now." Tatsuya turned around to leave, but suddenly he felt someone tugging his shirt from behind. Tatsuya turned around and saw Ophis tugging it and asked, "What happened?" Ophis, still in her emotionless tone, asked, "You leaving?" Tatsuya gave a small smile and patted her head and said, "Sorry, I have to go now, but we can meet each other later. After all, we are friends, and whenever you want to meet me, just ask Kuroka and she will bring you with her." Ophis nodded and let go of his shirt. Tatsuya again turned around to leave but was again stopped, this time by Vali. "Hey, wait, before you go, how about we have a spar? I also want to see whether you are as strong as Kuroka tells you are or not." Tatsuya gave a tired sigh and said, "Look, I am very tired today, and I am not in the mood to fight, so just leave, all right?" Hearing him, Vali snorted and said, "You cannot be that tired. Those devils you just fought must only be small fries, seeing that even your clothes are completely clean. Tatsuya looked back at him with a neutral look and said, "You didn't hear my conversation with Ophis, I guess. Didn't you hear I am not interested in fighting? I even rejected the chance to fight the Great Red, so what makes you think that I will agree to fighting you?" Vali got a bit angry and then gave an evil smile and said, "If you only require motivation to fight me, how about I kill your fam dash?" Just as he was about to say anything further, he was thrown away by an invisible force at an insane speed, and he crashed through 10 walls, turning them into rubble in the process. His teammates were very shocked on seeing that. Even Ophis was a bit surprised by it. They all looked back at Tatsuya, whose hand was aimed in Vali's direction. Tatsuya looked coldly in Vali's direction and asked in a cold voice, "I didn't quite hear you, want to say it again?"